Dumping in, Pawat rips and scores! They dumped it in out of the corner, and Pawat just bombs one. Over to the near side. Hughes with a no-look. Saved by Bennington. The rebound scored, and the Devils have taken a 2-0 lead. Dump it in, Alda got it hit off of the referee. Comes loose in front, and the Blues clear to the line, not out. Dillon with a shot, he scores. That's just a bad break. 3-0 New Jersey. Got her into traffic, shoots it high, and the time's going to wind down. That'll do it as the New Jersey Devils come into St. Louis, and they beat the Blues by a score of 4-1. That'll move the Blues back to the 500 mark.
Look, no better way to say it than that was just a dud last night. A 4-1 loss to the New Jersey Devils on home ice before this team goes back out onto the road for 3 straight. And yes, a very good Devils team, but a Devils team that in the first 15 minutes you thought the Blues were going to be able to stay with. And then once that first goal went in, things really fell apart quickly. With Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. It is BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. As you heard, voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber, who will join us today at 1:30, say as the Blues fall back to 500 on the season. And it's been a yo-yo effect for this team really since the middle of November. You get a couple of games above 500, a couple of games below 500, but you always seem to end up back at 500. And Tanner, the story in that one last night, at least for me, was twofold. One, you didn't have pushback. We'll play some audio from Jim Montgomery in just a bit. But two, the offense for St. Louis has gone quiet. And we talked yesterday about how they're playing at 5-on-5, if things have really improved. And we came to the conclusion that, look, you're playing almost as similar to when Drew Bannister was the head coach and when Craig Berube was the head coach than what Jim Montgomery is doing right now. Small sample size, yes, but last night you wrapped up with a total of 20 shots on goal. You did not have a period with double-digit shots on goal. And in terms of shot attempts, you finished with 41. And when I go back, what was that game? It was the Dallas Stars, I believe. That was the second fewest shot attempts that Jim Montgomery has been with the Blues, and that was at 36. You had 41 against this New Jersey Devils. I think we're starting to see where this team is at offensively, and I personally thought that it was a perfect example of where this team is at when they pulled the goaltender late in the game to try and get within one. And after Thomas, Kyrou, Buchnevich, Neighbors, Shen, and Falk had a long shift, the next set of guys came out. And that next set of guys, Holloway and Bolduc, makes a lot of sense, look like pieces that are a part of your team moving forward. Sundqvist, Saad, Fowler, Parayko. And no coincidence that that group could not contain the puck in the offensive zone, and it goes into the empty net for a 4-1 final score. I think you're seeing where this team is at offensively.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when you have those guys out there for the second shift, when you've got your top guys gassed after pulling the goalie, you're right. It just kind of tells you where you are as an organization and that you don't have that depth of scoring that we were talking about, right? Yesterday we spent some time talking about, is this a pack mentality team? Well, they're trying to build that way. Now, I don't think they're there because they don't have the goal scorers, because their depth of scoring has really dried up. They're still the same team they were under Drew Bannister. You know, you look at where they were. You brought up these numbers yesterday. Shots on goal, 23.8 under Jim Montgomery, compared to 26.7 under Drew Bannister. So they're still the exact same team that they were. Now what we're seeing is what early on there with Jim Montgomery, what happened, we saw some of that depth of scoring really heat up. He had that stretch of Dylan Holloway to where we came on the air, I remember going, wow, could Dylan Holloway be the guy that the Blues have been looking for? Looks like the answer was he was more in a hot streak than anything else. Right now, they're so reliant on their top three guys. They're big dogs in Kyrou, Thomas, and Buchnevich. And if you take away that line right now for the Blues, or you take away those three players if they're not on the same line, you have nothing to fear of the St. Louis Blues. They're not going to get in. They're not going to sustain zone time, and they're not generating any shots period, that are really going to test your goalkeeper. So they are a team that is going to continue to have these struggles. I know we saw that little coach bump when Jim Montgomery took over. We're now kind of seeing that has disappeared, and now they are going to have to win defensive grinded out hockey games, and they're going to need to rely on their goaltending to be excellent for them because they're not going to generate a lot offensively.
Yeah, well, when you go back through this, I mean, you haven't had 30 shots on goal since, what is it? It's back in the Winnipeg Jets game, I believe was the last time you had 30 or more shots on goal. So that tells you that offensively you're a little snake bitten in the sense of what you're trying to accomplish. But it was also the passing last night. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I mentioned this to Joey during the postgame. It just felt like every time there would be a player that would look for a pass, the other guy wouldn't expect it. And then it would be out of his reach. It would be down the other end. I think there were like 18 or 19 whistles in the first period, which is a lot considering where they typically are at. They just don't feel like they're on the same page. Now, some may think it's an excuse. Some may think it's an explanation. There's been a lot of hockey and very little practice time. So that can play into that factor. But in games like that one against New Jersey, where Jim Montgomery has talked a lot about, like, hey, you need to find a way to get this team engaged. You got to find a way to get the crowd into it. It was a very sleepy first period, and a lot of that is because there's just no sustained offensive zone time. But it just feels like if you take a step back and look at where they're at, it's a holding pattern. And it sucks to say because you've seen all of these pieces, you've seen all of these additions, and you're thinking like, okay, Blues about to try and compete for a playoff spot. But once again, when you don't have some of these younger pieces that they're waiting on to bring more offense to the team, you are heavily reliant on 5 or 6 players. And you're going to get hot streaks of Dylan Holloway that get you excited. You're going to get Jake Neighbors who goes on a little bit of a tear in front of the net. But you're also going to get this period where when they don't show up, who shows up? Well, your top players. And they've been performing, but at some point you need secondary help. And that's the holding pattern that this team is in.
And guys like Holloway, you mentioned him on it, going through his hot streak, he still impacts the game.
Absolutely.
But when you don't have that depth of scoring, when you don't have a guy that's consistently there, or guys that are behind him too, like beyond Dylan Holloway, when you look at that third line, like you think back to that team a couple years ago, which is what I think they're trying to build towards, was the 9 20-goal scorers. Well, if you had a guy like a Holloway not scoring, you had somebody else that was there,
You
right?
had Thomas Kyrou playing on the third line because you had Tarasenko, Buchnevich, Barbashev on a second line, and O'Reilly and Perron as your top line.
And right now for the Blues, they've got, 5 guys that they can really look to and say, we need you to be producing for us. Maybe 6 if you want to put Braden Chen into that conversation. It's Chen, Neighbors, Holloway, and then it's Thomas, Kyrou, Kyrou, Thomas, and why am I blanking on that? Buchnevich.
Yeah.
Right, that's the 6 guys for you right now. And really the ones that are really driving offense are currently just those top 3, that first line for the St. Louis Blues. They just don't have those guys that they can turn to and say, hey, we need this line to really be producing for us. Right now, they don't really have a good bottom 6 currently. They've got a solid fourth line that does its job when it's together. That W2EF line we've seen can be an energy line for them, but because they're not getting production from like a Brandon Saad, for example, what happens? You got to break up the WTF line. You've got to move Toropchenko up to that second line, and they're still trying to balance out this depth of scoring, and it just leads to where now you've got more pieces. Once again, we've talked about this all season long, some pieces that are playing up in a role that they shouldn't be. Oscar Sundqvist shouldn't be a third-line center at this point in his career. That's not where he's at. He needs to be a fourth-line center. Well, you don't have an option at third line, so you have to put him up there,
right,
which then impacts those wingers on his side with a Bolduc. You brought this up in the office. Maybe Holloway's being a little bit victimized by having Oscar Sundqvist as his centerman. Because when did we see Bolduc and Holloway playing really well? When Braden Chen was their center.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is they still have pieces that are not in the proper place, and that's why you're seeing them continue to have these offensive struggles this season. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that's magically going to turn on its head unless they bring in some support from the outside. That goes back to our conversation yesterday of how much, if you're Doug Armstrong, are you willing to push on this roster? But right now you look like you're just a 500 team, and I don't know if you're going to see much improvement beyond that.
Yeah.
To me, the defensive depth has been fine. Like, you've had a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the puck, and the next player comes in, steps up, and he's been fine. On the forward side of things, though, you have an injury And it's like every time you pull one player out, it's like the whole Jenga tower falls
You
over.
said it yesterday, or Monday, you said it, Grant, to where it's like if you lose a center on this team, you're bleeped.
Yeah.
Because, like, look at the trickle-down effect of losing a Radek Foxy. Your faceoffs have been awful, but on top of that, you're putting an Oscar Sundquist in the third-line centerman spot, and if you don't like that, well, then you're moving a Dylan Holloway to a centerman spot, which now you're taking offense away from a line that's supposed to be depth for you.
And that's the key right there. And going back to what you mentioned, Alex, and I think this is a problem that has plagued the Blues for a couple years now. There has just been a level of disconnect on the ice. Like, the passing just isn't there at times. Like, and there's some full games. And I would consider last night one of these. The Philadelphia game was a big one for me. They couldn't complete a pass. Like, there were so many turnovers, so many odd man rushes for Philly because they simply just couldn't complete a pass. Like, I know for the Blackhawks, when their new head coach took over, they had a practice where literally one of the main drills that they ran was just tape-to-tape passing. And sometimes I feel like the Blues could benefit from something like that because you watch it and it's almost frustrating to watch because, well, the other team isn't, necessarily as skilled or as talented as the Blues. They're at least completing passes, getting into the offensive zone. But a lot of the reason why the Blues can't get into the offensive zone sometime and sustain that time when they are in there is because there's a lot of turnovers because of the lack of tape-to-tape passes. There's also not a lot of players that hunt pucks down and are hard on pucks. And when you don't have either of those things, it's going to be hard to, sustain pressure in the offensive zone. And I think it's the simple things like that that are really hurting the Blues right now.
Yeah, it is simple things. And I want to play this cut from Jim Montgomery last night because in his press conference, I thought he said a couple of things that were really impactful in terms of where we see this team at. Take a listen.
I thought our first 15 minutes, I thought it was pretty good. I thought our intensity was there. I thought we were a little bit faster than they were. They scored that goal, and then the air came out of the balloon, and we made it easy to be checked. Jersey did a great job of checking. Their habits and details were superior to ours after they scored that first goal. And that's where we got to become a little more resilient.
That part that he said at the beginning, T-Bone, that goal went in and the air was let out of the balloon. That's what this team was 2 years ago. Fragile. And I don't want to say that they've been that all season, but that's one of those things that you saw the frustration take over. Now, the Blues made a push in the third period, and it was great. And frankly, I think Jim Montgomery handled that third period so absolutely well. Pulled the goaltender with about 10 minutes left. You're down by 3 because that felt like a game you needed to get a goal. You score a goal, and then you can start to build momentum. They did, and then you're thinking, okay, here's the push. You take a couple of bad penalties, and then they kind of suck the life out of the game once again. I love the way Montgomery handled that. But you could see the frustration from the players as that game went along, and as that first goal went in, it was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And that's what you're trying to avoid if you're Jim Montgomery.
Yeah, that is where they really fell victim 2 years ago, as you said, of anytime they had that one goal go in, it almost felt like the backbreaker every single time. And this group hasn't been that for the most part this year. They've had some moments of that.
They came back a lot in the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and they had a couple of those games where they've gotten shellacked before, as we've seen. I think they've lost 2 games 8-1 this year. So you've seen some moments of this, but it's not as bad as it was 2 years ago. So though it was frustrating last night, they didn't pull themselves into the fight quick enough. I know they went after the player in the third period.
Yeah, Siegenthaler.
At that point, the game was out of hand. Might as well send the message as they were trying to do, but I, for the most part, am not too concerned about it. I think they've been able to avoid having multiple games snowball, that snowball effect that we've talked about in the past of, hey, they continue to have games where it is one goal goes in, game's over. One goal goes in, game's over. They've avoided that for the most part, so I'm not too concerned, though last night was a little disappointing here on home ice against the Devils.
Yeah, so they'll be back at it. They start a 3-game road trip, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, but schedule does become a little bit more favorable for that team. But for right now, they've got to find a way to get points. They start a road trip, Tampa and Florida, Thursday, Friday, and then they take on the Detroit Red Wings on Sunday. They get off for the Christmas break, and then they go back at it for a few more before the end of the season in Buffalo, Nashville, and the Chicago Blackhawks. And then you hit the new year with hopefully the schedule opening up a little bit more. Tanner Hendrickson, Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, we saw another trade by the Chicago Cubs take place overnight last night. What does that mean for the Nolan Arenado potential trade? I'm not sure fans are going to like our answer next on 101 ESPN. So yesterday we had another trade in Major League Baseball, and it involved the Chicago Cubs, a team that just acquired Kyle Tucker from the Houston Astros, so they're making moves once again. And it's Cody Bellinger. With Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. So Jeff Passan reported yesterday that Cody Bellinger was traded to the New York Yankees. The former MVP was traded with cash to the Yankees for right-handed reliever Cody Poteet, who has played 3 seasons but has only pitched about 183 innings for them. So he's a bullpen arm, been up and down with the New York Yankees. But Bellinger, the former MVP, was a pure salary dump, T-Bone. So much so that, much like the Cardinals benefited from with Nolan Arenado, of receiving money on top of receiving the player for just some type of pitcher in their system, they said, get him out of here. And I think I was reading from Passan, the $5 million that was sent to the Yankees, 2.5 of it is to cover his salary next year, and then 2.5 is in case he doesn't exercise his option to stay with the Yankees. So basically they're giving him a little insurance with Cody Bellinger. And why this is so interesting is because this is a prime example of what you will be receiving if you try and trade Nolan Arenado. And Derek Gould yesterday on Gas House Gang podcast was talking about there's a legit possibility that Nolan Arenado does not get traded and could be starting for this team. But if you're trying to make all of your efforts to get Nolan Arenado off of your roster, off of your books if you're the Cardinals, then you just got a prime example of what it's going to look like. You're going to be paying money to get rid of Nolan Arenado. And when you do, like Cody Bellinger was an MVP a few years ago. Nolan Arenado has been declining for 2 consecutive seasons. You're not going to be getting much, if anything, in return with Nolan Arenado going the other direction.
And the funny thing is when you look at this trade, I think there's even the likelihood that the Cardinals are going to receive less than what the Cubs got in return for Cody Bellinger. And that's saying a lot considering they got basically nothing in return for Cody Bellinger.
It's a 30-year-old pitcher.
Because they got a swing arm that it'll probably impact their big league club. I don't know if the Cardinals would really look for that. So they'll probably look for kind of lottery ticket prospects, maybe shoot for a guy that's like in the low A that probably has a walks per 9 of like 10 or something crazy. That unless they're eating significant portion of the salary, you're not going to get a lot in return. And that's basically what the Cubs kind of showed you as the outline, if you will, for this kind of trade. And the other thing about this is Nolan Arenado is not only he has another year of control on his contract, making more money than the Bellinger contract, but he's also, as you said, he's in decline, and he's older than Cody Bellinger. I mean, you look at Cody Bellinger, he's going to be entering his age 29 season. Yeah. So he's still potentially got some of his prime, and if you're the Yankees, I can see how you convince yourself of bringing him in with that short porch in right field. Arenado's entering his age 34 season. So it just goes to show you that if you're going to have just a pure salary dump, which is what the Cardinals are trying to do here with Nolan Arenado, they don't want to eat a lot of money because, as most said at the winter meetings, hey, we are trying to cut payroll still. Then you're going to get a whole bunch of nothing. And I wonder if Cardinals fans are okay with that, of, hey, it's more about the playing time than it is about anything that we get in return for Nolan Arenado. If you're really going to go through a refresh, that's what you have to do. You have to move on from him, take the lottery ticket prospect that you get in return, and get the at-bats for Nolan Gorman at third base, and then you have Donovan at second, and you've got Nootbaar in left field. Everything becomes a little clear as long as you're able to move Arenado. But I know there are some people that still say, hey, well, wait a minute. That's a guy that is a star still, even though he's been declining. He is a star still, and is a former MVP candidate. Shouldn't we be getting more for that? And I think the answer is probably no.
No. I mean, they got a 30-year-old arm for $5 million. And if, from what the Cardinals are saying, they're not wanting to pay what a lot of teams are asking if they're taking on Nolan Arenado. Like Chandler Rome was the one that tweeted it out, the Athletic Astros insider. He's like, look, they're going to have to eat significant money off of this contract if the Astros are even interested in Nolan Arenado. Yeah. And we had Kylie McDaniel tell us, you're probably talking about eating $15 to $20 million of that contract. And that's what they got for $5 million. So if you're going to eat $20 million, maybe you get something a little bit more intriguing. But I think even the conversation starter for a lot of team has to be, you're eating $15 million of this. And then we can talk about maybe some type of piece in our system. And you know what, T-Bone? I'm fine with it. I am A-okay with me finding out that Arenado and cash was sent to Team X, and the Cardinals are receiving some low-named player that you're never going to hear from.
And low-lame.
And low-lame, I guess, depending on what the return is really going to be. But I'm fine with all of this because the whole point of moving on from Nolan Arenado isn't trying to get the best return, isn't trying to get some type of top prospect in your system. That was never what the expectation was. The expectation to get rid of Nolan Arenado was all about playing time, was all about, well, now Arenado is gone, which means Gorman is playing, which means this guy's playing, which means this guy's playing. Everybody has a defined role. And if it's going to cost me $20 million for this guy to go play elsewhere so that my team can actually start to get a view of what it's going to look like, then by all means, let's do that deal now.
Well, and where I think it's going to get interesting is I don't think the Cardinals will throw in $15 million for a deal. Now, maybe they'll throw in a little bit, $5 million, $10 million, whatever it is. If they throw in $15 million, they might get an okay prospect back, like maybe a guy that's like fringe top 30 in a system. But where I think this becomes interesting is, remember, Mo had a comment, I don't remember when it was. It might have been at the general manager meetings, of something along the lines of, we're not just going to trade somebody, right? We still want to get something in return that we think can help us. I don't think that's coming in this trade. So if that was in reference to an Arenado move, now it makes me question, okay, so if the Cardinals aren't going to eat much money in this deal, if any at all, and they still do want to get somewhat of a return in this, are they going to actually be able to move on from Arenado? Because you're right, it is more about not what you're getting in return. It is more about the possibilities that you are creating by moving a Nolan Arenado. But I'm fascinated to see how this plays out, because the way Mo has spoke, it doesn't sound like ownership wants to eat much of this contract. And if they are seriously looking at this saying, hey, we should get at least something that we can envision not really helps us, but envision that can help us down the road, I don't know if that's coming in this trade for Nolan Arenado. That feels like it would be more in the kind of Steven Matz trade. And maybe that was what Mo was talking about, of, hey, if we move on from Matz, we think we can get something in return, because Matz has a market, and his $11 million is nothing compared to like a Matthew Boyd who's getting $15 million a year to start for the Chicago Cubs. I find it very interesting to see what they are going to do and what they are seeking in this trade, and what they do ultimately end up eating, because my expectation is it is going to be very minimal, the amount of dollars that they're going to be sending to whoever it is that ends up trading for Nolan Arenado.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the teams that it was John Denton that put out there, correct, that were at least teams that Arenado was willing to waive his no trade to. And if I remember this correctly, it was the Yankees, it was the Dodgers. Was it the Red Sox on that list? I don't remember I don't remember every single name, but what I'm getting at is you're starting to see that list dwindle, in terms of, like, the Yankees have now acquired Cody Bellinger, and they have they signed Max Fried, so like they've given out a lot of money.
It feels like it's now down to the Astros or bust, right?
And the Astros, like we just mentioned, Chandler Rome, the one that covers for The Athletic, the Astros basically said, like, they're going to have to eat significant money if the Astros are even willing to listen to this.
Yeah, I am now at the spot where I think it is probably Astros or bust, because, Katie had her mailbag earlier today on The Athletic, and it certainly sounds like, hey, the Yankees didn't really have that much interest. It was more of, okay, he's like playing like E or F for the New York Yankees.
Yeah.
Red Sox, maybe they do go there if they don't land Alex Bregman, but I'm not sure how much the Yankees really want, or the Red Sox, really want to do that, because then you've got to move Devers across the diamond to first base. And then it is just down to, okay, are the Astros the team that want to make this move? Maybe they are. But if they aren't, now it becomes a question of, okay, well, where is it that he's going to go? Is it Philly? Because Philly doesn't give off the vibe that they're looking at Nolan Arenado.
And they're not going to get him until they trade Alec Bohm. And now it seems like they're not willing to trade Alec Bohm. So, like, these names are starting to dwindle, which means it's going to be even more pivotal for John Mozeliak to have to eat money. And if they're not willing to eat money, I don't know where those conversations really go. Just a quick side note on the Chicago Cubs. They acquire Kyle Tucker. They trade away Cody Bellinger, pure salary dump to get rid of Cody Bellinger. Are you at all optimistic that this team is going to give Kyle Tucker a contract extension? Because the Chicago Cubs, once again, what is it? The highest contract that they handed out was to Jason Hayward.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking significant bounce from what Hayward is to what Kyle Tucker is going to be receiving. I personally look at this and say, like, why would you acquire a Kyle Tucker if you're not willing to look at him and say, what do we need to give you to lock up because you're a part of our future? But, man, when you're giving out players for basically nothing, I'm not too sure this team's going to be paying Kyle Tucker.
Yeah, when I saw this trade, I was like, okay, so they're must be trying to repurpose money, are the Cubs. Man, the Cubs could just continue to be a team that they could have ate a significant portion of that contract if they wanted to get a better return than what they did. Or they could have just held on to Cody Bellinger.
Yeah.
You know? And
it's a good lineup with Bellinger.
Yeah, and instead they continue to move him. They're using it to kind of pivot, as they're saying. It feels like they're just going to do the one-year run with Kyle Tucker. And I think the Cubs are in that spot now with a Kyle Tucker who is – the best player in the NL Central? Maybe a position player, I should say. I think he's probably the best player in the NL Central with Ellie De La Cruz right there with him.
I'd agree.
You have a chance to lock that guy up to the Chicago Cubs and flex their might in this NL Central and take control of this division for the next 5 years. Yet I don't think they're going to do it because we just saw them penny pinch once again with Cody Bellinger. So, as you mentioned, that Hayward thing of him having the biggest contract they've ever given out, why would I think that they're going to hand out their first, not just would be their first $400 million contract in franchise history, it would be their first $300 million contract handed out in franchise history, and a $200 million contract that's been handed out in franchise history. The Cubs are in that spot right now to really claim this division for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to do it, which as a Cardinals, someone that covers the Cardinals and as people that are fans of the St. Louis Cardinals, I'm going, thank goodness that this team looks like they're not going to bring back Kyle Tucker on a contract, because if they did, they've got the best player, arguably, in the NL Central in his prime still, and they can build around that. But it doesn't look like they're going to necessarily do it, which allows the Cardinals their chance to reset and potentially move right back and being the team that can control this division in just a couple of years.
Just go out and give Kyle Tucker all the money in free agency. They'll be the ones that throw that $400 million out.
We can't do that.
Still fresh.
It would be our first $200 million contract and our first $300 million contract.
What is it about the NL Central that nobody wants to hand out money these days? Apparently so. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. Also our YouTube channel, 101 ESPN STL. Studio Cam's Air Alliance team as the Graveyard Chat is up and running. I see Cat Dad Gamer in there already live with us, DJ Patty Cakes as well. So we'll get to your questions coming up in 15 minutes. You can send us your questions, 314-399-9646. But coming up next, we'll get to some NFL quick hitters here on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Blues can't string the 2 home game wins together as last night they fell 4-1 to the New Jersey Devils. They went down 3-0 before Jordan Kyrou scored with the goaltender pulled, but they couldn't get anything else as Jesper Bratt scored into the empty net, and the Blues fall back to 500, 15-3 on the season. They are now 6th in the Central Division, and when it comes to the playoff conversation, they are still 3 points out, with Calgary, the last spot in the wild card, having a game in hand on the Blues. Blues will look to build on that. They are back in action tomorrow and Friday, a back-to-back in Florida. Tampa tomorrow, Florida on Friday. Both pregame starting at 5 o'clock here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN. I'm Grant Francis. The Sports Center update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Along with Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Questions and answers coming up in our next segment. You send us your questions, 314-399-9646. We'll get to your answers next. But now we get to some NFL quick hitters, and we start with the Atlanta Falcons, boys. Because with 3 games left in the season and still legitimate playoff hopes alive for this Atlanta Falcons team, they said, we're done with Kirk Cousins. We're going to Michael Penix Jr. What are they doing, T-Bone? Because I understand it. Like, Kirk Cousins has been bad, and you gotta go with the guy that you think you can win with. But with 3 games left, you're going to make this move, and now all of the controversy and talk surrounding this team is, well, do you cut Kirk Cousins? Is he a part of this team? How do you get rid of him? And now, on top of trying to play for a playoffs where you've been a very bad team for about 5 or 6 weeks, now you got to deal with all the outside noise of your quarterback who's being benched.
I actually like it. I think it's smart to go to Michael Penix at this point in the season. And look, I get it. You are still in the playoff race. It's kind of like the conversation we talked about with Dvorsky yesterday, right? Do you really want to put a rookie in there and be kind of the guy that solves your problems, quote unquote? And the Falcons are like, yeah, sure, why not? We'll just throw Michael Penix in there and have him start. Look, Kirk Cousins has been awful over the last 5 games. He's thrown 1 touchdown to 9 interceptions. And their schedule is pretty easy for the remainder of this stretch for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, you look at what they've got left. They've got the New York Giants at home, who just announced that they're changing quarterbacks again, at the Washington Commanders, and versus Carolina. So if you win that Commanders game, you're probably going to win out. And if that's the case, you've got the tiebreaker over Tampa Bay, so you need Tampa Bay to lose 1 game. You kind of control a little bit of your own destiny. You do need some help, but for the most part, you're kind of in the driver's seat. Well, as we saw in that Monday night game against Vegas, Kirk Cousins actually probably gives you a chance to lose against the Giants and against Carolina. He's just too slow. He cannot move coming off that Achilles injury. And you know who else we saw that affect? Aaron Rodgers.
Yep.
Both those guys at their age, man, it is hard to come back when you blow your Achilles out like they did. So I think it's the smart move. Worst case scenario, you miss the playoffs and you get a 3-game sample of, okay, what does Michael Penix look like in our offense? I think now was the time. I think they had to make this move for both the future and for any hope that they had to make in the playoffs.
Man, I hate it. I hate the decision. I just don't think that's the time you want to put this young quarterback in a position. And look, I understand he gets paid. He goes out there. He needs to perform. What better way to show that you're ready to be the guy than get this team to the playoffs when Kirk Cousins couldn't? But on top of all of the pressure being a quarterback with a team that's desperate to make the playoffs, now you've got all of the noise of, well, was he going to take the job from Kirk Cousins? And look, you got to handle these professional athletes, but man, I don't like the decision. If I'm Atlanta, I would have done this about 5 or 6 weeks ago when Kirk Cousins looked like he was stalling. But instead, you stuck with it. You pulled out a couple of victories, great. But Kirk Cousins has looked bad since the first week of the season. Like, at some point, you should have looked at this and said, hey, we bleeped up. We shouldn't have signed Kirk Cousins. Probably should have just stuck with Michael Penix all along. Is this true? He has 4 fumbles in his last 4 games.
Who, Cousins?
Yeah. Am I looking at this right?
That I don't know. I wasn't looking at his running.
It looks like in terms of rushing, he has a fumble against the Philadelphia Eagles, 2 against the Kansas City Chiefs, and then 1 against New Orleans.
I wouldn't doubt it because I can't move in the pocket. So when he gets hit, he's going to get potential of strip sacks. So I don't doubt that he's probably fumbled those 4 times here over the last couple of games. He's been bad.
He's been bad.
And the funny thing is like you look back to early November, had 2 solid games, I would say, end of October, early November. In that game against Tampa Bay, they win 31-26 on the road. He goes for 276 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Following week versus Dallas. Granted, it is Dallas. Ends up not only throwing for 222 yards, but has 3 passing touchdowns. And since then, it has just been, whoa, Kirk Cousins has suddenly lost it.
He hasn't had a fumble in 10 of his 14 games this season.
Has? Wow.
Yeah, he has had a fumble in 10 of his 14 games this season.
He leads the league in interceptions, too. And I was at that Minnesota and Atlanta game in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. He made one impressive pass. He had an interception. He should have had another interception because it was a weird play. It looked like the Vikings intercepted it, but it was reviewed, and it was one of those plays where, like, probably would have been ruled an interception if they ruled that on the field, but it was inconclusive. It's just, I have no problem benching Kirk Cousins, but I have a problem with it at this point in the season. Like, you're basically asking Michael Penix to go out there and be perfect for the next 3 games because Tampa's a game ahead of you, and you mentioned Atlanta's schedule being easy. Tampa's not that much more difficult. Like, they've got Dallas, Carolina, and New Orleans.
Yeah.
They're pretty simple as well, so Atlanta kind of has to be perfect, and it still might not be enough.
So let's ask the biggest elephant in the room question. Does somebody go out there and pick up Kirk Cousins if he's gone? Because, like, I would imagine it's not going to be a part of this team beyond this season.
What gave that away? That he wasn't thrilled when they drafted Penix?
Yeah, that he wasn't thrilled about that he's now benched in the final 3 games of the season with the playoffs. You think so?
No.
First of all, Kirk Cousins, like, props to you, man. The man has made like over $300 million, and he has been like fired from multiple teams.
He should be in this. It was Andrew Brandt, I think's his name, the old Packers GM who's on Twitter. He's right. He should be in the Sports Business Hall of Fame for the amount of money that he's brought in his career for being average.
I saw a text from the 314. I totally agree with it. Cousins is a New York Jet. 100%.
Or a New York Giant.
Yeah. He's a New Yorker.
Yeah, either way. So he represents a $40 million cap hit next year. All of that is guaranteed to the Atlanta Falcons. And if they cut him post-June, they're on the hook for that full $40 million and then another $25 million in 2026.
Yeah.
They're bleeped. So you just handle that if you're the Falcons.
And I saw someone tweet this out earlier today. He can basically do what Derek Carr did when he left Vegas because he's got no trade protection in his contract. Because technically for the Falcons, they can trade him and they will still have a big dead cap hit on their books, but then they don't have to worry about it in 2026. The other team now takes on his $27.5 million base salary. NFL contracts complicated as hell. But
very complicated.
What Cousins can do is what Derek Carr did, which was, I'm not going to accept a trade. You need to cut me. You cut me, and I want to go find my own team. Okay,
because I'm getting paid, and then the next team's going to pay me.
And to your question though, of like, is somebody going to do this? Oh yeah, someone's going to take the opportunity to say, you know what, just that first year coming off an Achilles injury, down year for Kirk Cousins. We've got nothing else in our quarterback room. He makes all the sense for us. It's not a deep quarterback class either. So whoever doesn't get Shedeur Sanders, I could totally see where, like you mentioned, the Giants. If the Giants end up with the 2nd, 3rd overall pick, I could totally see where maybe they draft Travis Hunter and they say, let's go out and get Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Whether it's trade, sign him to a friendlier contract, if you will. I can see where somebody's going to give him an opportunity. We've seen this. Sport teams always go by more of what the name is. It takes like 2 or 3 bad years before teams finally admit, oh, that's not Kirk Cousins. He's like half the guy that he used to be.
Well, and I think it feels a little bit like the Russell Wilson situation, too, where it was like, who wants him? Nobody's going to take him. And then somebody takes him, and now look at what Russell Wilson has been doing. But
unfortunately for Kirk, Mike Tomlin's already got 2 quarterbacks, so he can't find another one.
I don't think there's going to be a more friendly situation for a washed-up quarterback than Pittsburgh. But, you know, for Kirk, it's likely he'll find somewhere.
Speaking of living in denial, Jerry Jones spoke to the media recently.
I saw this.
Dallas Cowboys owner on the team's flagship station, which I'm surprised he went back on after, his whole tirade.
Didn't he fire everybody on
I was
that
going to say,
station?
I thought he was firing everybody there, but he was asked about his head coach, Mike McCarthy, his defensive coordinator, Mike Zimmer, and he said, quote, I give them both high grades this year. Guys, I I've liked some of the pieces with the Dallas Cowboys. I think I saw a mock draft that said like Ashton Ginty might get drafted by the Dallas Cowboys.
It's such a Jerry Jones
Jerry Jones move, but I got to be honest, it would be fun for how well that guy has played this season for Boise State. But none of it matters about that team if Jerry Jones is going to continue to live in denial about Mike McCarthy. Defensive coordinator, fine, whatever. Your defense has been bad, but who cares? The head coach is the problem, and until they admit that mistake, I don't think there's anything that's going to change with this Dallas Cowboys team.
So can I try and make the argument for Mike McCarthy?
No.
Not because he's a great coach, but hear me out. Mike Zimmer, first off, should be fired as the defensive coordinator. He's been terrible. I won't hear any argument for him. Low grade for him.
No, high grade.
For Mike
high
McCarthy,
grade.
no, low grade, F. For Mike McCarthy, the only reason that I could get why the Cowboys would bring him back is if you do fire him, how appealing is that job right now? Like, think about the jobs that have opened up. You're going to have the Jets job, which, but the Bears is clearly number one already this offseason.
Yeah.
Well, Saints job's open.
Better than the Saints job.
I would think so as well. But we'll see what else opens up as the offseason goes along. Like, if Jacksonville fires Peterson, that to me is a more appealing spot, I think, than the Cowboys.
See,
Cowboys roster is way too top heavy right now.
I get it, but if I'm a guy that wants to win now, and because if I'm Ben Johnson, that no bleeping way. I want to go somewhere that I have like a window. But like, I've got a quarterback, I've got a wide receiver, a star wide receiver, and I've got 2 stars on the defensive side. Now, who knows what happens with Micah Parsons, because might get traded because his contract is going to be coming up soon. But like, I've got all of the pieces so that I could win now if I'm confident in myself as a head coach, compared to like if I go to Jacksonville or the Saints or the Bears, it might look good, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
See, I don't think they've got the pieces to win right now, because right now they have Dak Prescott, hurt, of course, but they've got Dak Prescott under contract. They've got CeeDee Lamb. They have no running back to speak of. Their offensive line has been bad, and they've got Micah Parsons, who, as you just mentioned, they should probably look to trade this offseason, if we're being honest. Like, they've handed out so much money to some of their top guys that it's gotten to the point where they don't have the money to spend on depth. Their roster, to me, is in shambles. I don't think that job's compelling, and it's the only reason that I would almost make an argument for, like, hey, let's just keep Mike McCarthy another year. Let's see if we can turn this around a little bit better, and then see if maybe we can have ourselves as a more compelling job to go out there and get the best options, right? Because you mentioned Ben Johnson. He's going to be number one target for everybody.
Yeah.
Ben Johnson wouldn't take that job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the matter of fact in the conversation is the job will always be unappealing when Jerry Jones is there. Because he's in charge, he makes all the decisions. So you're going to have a very limited list of coaches that would be interested in joining your team as a head coach. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, we'll get to your questions. 314-399-9646, our Air Comfort Service text line. Over on the Graveyard, our YouTube chat at 101 ESPN STL. Send us your questions. We'll answer them next on 101 ESPN. 399-9646 Ear Comfort Service text line. Also, our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Studio Cams brought to you by Air Alliance Team. We've got the Graveyard Chat up and running where you can send us your questions, and we'll answer them for you now here on BK and Ferrario. We'll start here at the 314. Fellas, how those fantasy football teams looking? Well, Grant, I know yours is all on the injured list.
I'm a defunct organization now. I'm not coming back next season.
Back-to-back years, his entire team is just basically on the IR.
I don't even check my team anymore. I got so irritated with it. I'm like, you know what? For my mental health, I'm going to step away from this.
Tried to make a trade with you, man, and you wouldn't make the move earlier in the year.
If I did make the move, they probably would have just gotten injured.
Probably true. Tanner?
I'm just done.
Back-to-back champ?
Back-to-back champ
Going for
did
3-peat?
not make the playoffs here at 101 ESPN, but could be technically a back-to-back champ because in my other league, I'm in the playoffs in the semifinals. So,
okay,
just had a weird year. I blame Debo, but
BK.
I probably shouldn't point the fingers, but I do blame Debo Samuel.
I'm in the final four. I'm in the final four. I'm taking on. I don't remember who I'm taking on, but I know Kerry Davis is in the other final four, and I think Andrew Marsh is as well. But there's four of us remaining, so I can be the champ this year. Probably not.
I was for Kerry.
I was projected. I was projected to have the best record in the league this year.
Yeah, we all know how that goes.
Yeah,
when you get projected with the best team, your team typically when you get an A on your draft, your team's going to suck. That's what I've learned over these years.
That's what happened to me.
From the 314, question, guys, is trading one of Burleson, Nootbaar, Donovan, or Gorman and get a decent starting pitcher in return and then keeping Arenado a better option than just getting rid of Arenado?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is I don't think Nolan Arenado is worth his contract anymore. He is more of a distressed asset than anything. He's clearly on the decline. I'm not expecting a bounce back offensive year. I remember that was the conversation last year, and I was open-minded to it of, okay, had one weird year, maybe you bounce back, look solid. And instead we saw him get worse offensively. I think defensively he's gotten worse as he's getting older. He's still really good defensively, don't get me wrong. But I want to know what you have in Burleson, Nootbaar, Donovan, and Gorman. Really the only guy out of that group that I feel like you really know what you have in is Donovan. I want to see Burley do it again. Burley kind of fell off in the second half. I think that's more of hey, it's his first year as a big leaguer, kind of starting to wear down a little bit. Nootbaar, I think there is still a pretty high ceiling on Lars Nootbaar, but he can't stay healthy. What happens if you get that year of him looking healthy? Maybe it never comes. Maybe it ends up being more of O'Neill's a bit of a stretch because O'Neill would miss more games than Nootbaar, but maybe he is just an injury-prone guy. And same for Gorman. Look, Gorman, people don't like me saying this. I'm not giving up on him, man, because he's got the best pure power in this organization, period. And I don't want to give up potentially on a 40 home run guy until I am at last gasp. It's clearly not working here in St. Louis, and I don't think you're there. So I think it makes more sense to hold on to those four guys rather than just saying, you know what, let's just keep Nolan Arenado.
Yeah, well, what are you trying to do this season? You trying to win? Or are you trying to...
Who are you asking, me or Mo?
Well...
Kind of like who you asking when we had this conversation with the Blues, me or Army?
Touche, sir, but I would much rather get rid of a piece that does not fit in the timeline that I believe I'm going to be in to try and get back to a competitive window, get rid of that asset, then trade away a piece that's supposed to help me get to that competitive window for a starting pitcher that we all know can break. If you were putting those players in front of me, sure, I could look at them and say, okay, well, Gorman's, I see the 40 home run potential. Love Brendan Donovan. I've got Lars Nootbaar. I've got Alec Burleson. Do I need both of these guys? And if this was the team that was trying to be competitive again this year, I would say no. And I would say, yeah, flip one of those and hope Arenado figures it out. But you're not in that spot. You're trying to cut payroll. You're trying to reset the pipeline. I'd rather keep the young players and get rid of a guy than go out there and make a trade for something that doesn't really benefit you for the long term. One more from the 636. Guys, when you talk about the St. Louis Blues and their play, at what point do you look at it and say, nope, just a lost season? At no point am I going to say that this year unless there's an 11-game losing streak. Even last year, I temporarily bought back in when they went on a little bit of a hot streak, and I mean, rightfully so for how they played under Drew Bannister. But this team, regardless of them being a 500 team or still finding ways to lose, they're in almost all of these games. And to me, that tells me there's improvement compared to where it was last year. So, no, like this is going to be a fight for a playoff spot until the last game of the regular season. And if they go into a 8, 9, 10 game losing streak, that's when you can look at this and say, yep, might be a lost season.
Yeah, I don't know if this will ever become a point where it's a lost season. I guess it just depends on how you want to define a lost season, because they are still playing some young guys in Bolduc, Holloway, Broberg. So it's a season where you're trying to find some answers out, potentially find out answers on a Dvorsky later on in the year. When I think of my definition of a lost season is essentially like a rebuilding year.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, where it's like, hey, we don't really have anything in our system. 2 years ago, pretty good example. That was the Vrana Hayes year. Or no, that was last year. Sorry, 2 years ago would have been Vrana and
2 years
Kapanen.
ago was Vrana and Kapanen.
Post-deadline, there wasn't a lot you were really going to find out about that team, right? They move on from O'Reilly. They move on from Tarasenko. They claim a Vrana. They claim a Kapanen. Like, you weren't going to find out a whole lot. At that point, it was became a lost year. This year, you're always going to be kind of getting more answers, right? What is Broberg's potential? What is Holloway's potential? What does Zach Bolduc look like? If Dvorsky gets up here, what will he look like? So I find it tough to see at any point this year in which it'll become a lost year. I got worried about that when Thomas and Broberg got hurt of it potentially falling victim to that. But those guys drink their milk and they came back quicker than we were expecting. So, yeah, so I'm not too worried of it becoming a lost year for the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think at the very least they're going to be in a similar spot where they were last year. I think that's their floor. Like, being right at the playoffs at the end of the season, it's going to be a matter of a couple games whether or not they get in. I think their ceiling could be top wild card. I don't see them getting into the, top 3 of the division. I think that would be their ceiling. But I mean, look, like, I said it yesterday when Craig Berube took over in 2018. That he had a worse record at this point than Jim Montgomery does in the first 11 games. So it takes time to really get things going. And I mean, look at last year. I just looked this up. At this time last year, the Edmonton Oilers were 13-14-1. They had a worse record than what the Blues have right now. Like, it's hard to say that a season is lost at this point in the season, especially because things can change so much in the second half.
Yeah, it's lost, in my opinion, if you're not playing for a playoff spot in April or March. Post-trade deadline, if you're not fighting for a playoff spot and you're just talking about, well, maybe they could get in, but it's going to have to be miracle, that would be somewhat of a lost season, because I do think you need to have some competitive hockey at the end of the year. Because if you don't play competitive hockey by the end of the season, well, then all of these young guys didn't get a taste of that to try and help improve this team. And that's pretty obviously what they were trying to accomplish when they made all of these aggressive moves in the offseason and in the regular season. But a lot of the reason why they're staying in this conversation is because of their big 3. And this has been an area that I think a lot of people were questioning last year. But if we finally got an answer on the Blues' big 3 players and how they impact the team moving forward, we'll answer that next and talk a little bit about Jordan Binnington next on 101 ESPN. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Became Ferrario on 101 ESPN as the Blues lost to the Devils last night 4-1. We talked a lot about Jordan Kyrou over these last couple of games, who did score again last night, by the way. And JR had this stat last night. Kyrou has a 12-game point streak on home ice, 7 goals and 5 assists. That is the longest home point streak by a Blues player since Craig Janney back in the 1993-1994 season. So Jordan Kyrou, ladies and gentlemen, he has been impressive. But so has Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich. And last night, when they needed a spark, they put those three together in the third period, generated some scoring opportunities, even scored the goal with the goaltender pulled to make it somewhat of a game until they took some penalties and then empty net goal goes in. We asked last season, T-Bone, it felt like every single national analyst that we had on, do the Blues have a top line? Do they have a dangerous line that other teams have to plan for? And surprisingly, almost every one of them said, absolutely. With Buch and Thomas and Kyrou, that's a dangerous line. I still don't feel like it's a line that you can go to on a nightly basis and say, go out there and perform for us. Sometimes I think they get too cute on the ice, and it leads to lack of offensive zone time, and then odd man rushes the other way. But the numbers mightily go against what I'm saying. And you were looking this up in the office in terms of that line together. It's been among lines that have played 90 minutes or more, because that's what those three have played together, Thomas, Kyrou, and Buchnevich this season, according to MoneyPuck.com. They're averaging 3.18 goals expected per game, which is 26th in the National Hockey League. It's right there with Calgary's top line and Colorado's top line of Arturi Lehkonen, Nathan McKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen. And that line is averaging about 1.96 goals per game. And if you look at the Corsi rating when they've been on the ice together, it's about 56%. If you look at high danger scoring chances, it's about 16-3. If you look at just scoring chances, it's about 25-7. This has legitimately been a top line for the Blues this season. And to me, that's another check mark, T-Bone. We did last year, you got the check mark of the goaltending. We got the check mark of the top pair defenseman in Colton Parayko. And then you go out there and you get Philip Broberg. I was still questioning if they've got a top line that can carry them, and we are seeing them have a top line that is beneficial.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you can put the check mark, and if you don't want to go by them as a line as a whole, at least with the big three, as I'll call them, right?
Yeah.
The three $8 million players on the roster, and Kyrou, Thomas, and Buch. We were talking about at the beginning of the season, hey, if the Blues are going to get to the playoffs, what needs to happen? Well, they need their three guys to carry them. They need Buch, Thomas, and Kyrou to carry them. And as a line, they've been really good. I know we've had the conversation of should you break them up? Should they be together? I'm on the side of they should be together. But those three guys have played really well. And Buch has played well ever since being moved off of, guess what? The center position.
What?
Which we were all talking about for a really long time this year.
Are you kidding me?
I digress, though. I just thought I'd bring it up again. Those three guys to me have proven, hey, you've got the three right guys to be the kind of the heads of the core, right? That was something that I thought was still a little bit of a question mark coming into the year. That's why we had the conversations about Jordan Kyrou. We had the conversations of should the Blues have re-signed Pavel Buchnevich when we had that conversation in the offseason, at the trade deadline last year. And they did, and now you're seeing these guys play well. So you can put the check next to them. What you're seeing this season is that the Blues don't have that depth of scoring that we talked about in our opening segment. It's not that their three guys aren't carrying them. They've been fantastic so far this year. It's been more of, hey, you don't have really a second-line center or more of a third-line center. You don't have another good goal scorer that you can put up onto that top line, which then moves Kyrou down to the second line, and he gets the better matchups when he's on that second line, which the Blues have taken advantage of at times this season. I think you're seeing that you've got the three right guys to be kind of the leaders of this kind of retool on the forward side of things in Kyrou, Buch, and Thomas. This year where you're not getting that check mark is, okay, we don't have the depth still. And we kind of knew that going into the year. Yeah. They have found some nice pieces in Dylan Holloway. Jake Neighbors is a nice complimentary piece, but they're still missing some depth pieces, and that's the one spot they won't be able to put a check mark by at least this season, in my opinion.
Yeah, you can't know that until you see them at the NHL, and frankly, you're not going to see that either till the end of this season or next season. But we got a text on the Air Comfort Service text line and says, that's great about the expected goals for, but what about the actual goals for? Well, the actual goals for, every single one of these guys since Jim Montgomery has taken over, has been a point-per-game player. Robert Thomas, since Jim Montgomery stepped in, 14 points in 11 games. We just mentioned to you what Jordan Kyrou has been doing. He's got a 7-game point streak now, and he scored goals in 5 straight games. And Pavel Buchnevich has been a point-per-game player. The problem isn't those guys scoring. The problem is when they don't score, what do the other guys do? And for a small sample size, you got Dylan Holloway. You got Zach Bolduc. You got Jake Neighbors. And that is great for this team because that's the development that needs to happen. But those guys are going to go cold. And you know what happens when they go cold? You look to your $8 million players and you say, can you carry us? Last season, you couldn't do that because it would be Kyrou would be in a dry spell. Pavel Buchnevich would be in a dry spell. Robert Thomas was a point-per-game player, but you were like, where's everyone else coming from? And now these guys on a nightly basis are showing up and scoring goals, picking up points. They're doing everything. And it always doesn't have to go back to, yeah, but are they really scoring goals? Because ask any player in that locker room. It's sometimes not about scoring. It's about creating zone time and building momentum for the other guys to go score. And they've been doing that. That line in general, whether it's been together or broken up, it's 2 waves that you could throw out there and say, good luck defending this. And what you're missing is you're just missing 2 other pieces that can step in and add to that depth. You referenced the 21-22 season, T-Bone. Why was that roster so good? Because there were 3 legitimate lines that every single shift, the other team was like, how are we going to stop this line? You don't have that right now, and you haven't had that since that roster, and that's what you're trying to get back to, but you unfortunately have to play a little bit of the patience game.
Yeah, and you know, one thing, too, I mean, you mentioned their impact on the ice. Look at them defensively, too, and I'm looking at Kyrou, Buch, and Thomas as a line together. Look, they're still doing the, hey, if we've got a lead, we're not going to play Kyrou. Like, he didn't play the final 7 minutes of the game.
That was the Rangers game.
Yeah, over the weekend against the Rangers.
Which I'm fine with, by the way.
Yeah, since they're trying to make the playoffs, I get it. You know, when they were in the retool, I don't mind the idea of playing Kyrou because I think Kyrou's been better defensively. But that gets to my point, right? I didn't think Kyrou would ever be a guy that you could say, hey, why would Kyrou not be on the top line? Well, the knock for me would always have been, well, isn't that where Thomas is? And you want Thomas to have the best matchups, right? Kyrou's been really good defensively this year. You know, he's still not an elite defensive winger. Yeah. He's not like what Perron was when he was with O'Reilly to help him shut down lines, but that's more of Buch's role. Buch is more of the guy that's going to play more of that 2-way game. But Kyrou's still been able to hold his own. I was surprised when I looked at that line today that their expected goals against is 20 per 60 minutes is at 22nd in the NHL right now. So they're a top 30 defensive line in the NHL when they've been together in their 90 minutes of play. So you can now have the argument of, hey, Kyrou can be on that line with Thomas that can also serve as kind of that shutdown role for the first 2.5 periods. Then you get a lead. You can go bring somebody else in, like go more responsible with a Braden Shen or I think they did Sundqvist over the weekend at times where they throw him out there. Yeah. I never thought you'd get to that point with Jordan Kyrou, and that's why I am officially ready to say, hey, because you're getting a more defensively responsible Kyrou on top of performance from Buch and Thomas, as you mentioned, as point-per-game guys with Kyrou in this span under Jim Montgomery, yeah, you can now put that check next to, okay, these 3 guys, they are going to be pieces when we exit this retool. Prior to this season, there was still some question marks, especially on Jordan Kyrou, if he was going to be one of those guys.
Yep. Well, and you think about it, too, like, if the Blues do have depth of scoring, like if they're able to get more production out of their bottom 6, their second line, if Jordan Kyrou becomes a top line player and you have that Buch, Thomas, Kyrou line, like think about the production Kyrou would be putting up in that scenario because you don't have to just key in on that one player. Yeah. Like he's still putting up numbers without the secondary scoring, you know, being there to help him out a little bit. Like he's got 14 goals. That's tied with Connor McDavid. It's more than Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah, and he's only playing 15 minutes a night.
Keep in mind with that, they're blowing him out of the water when it comes to assists. So, like, offensive production, they're doing more. But in terms of goal scoring, Kyrou has more than McKinnon, tied with, you know, Connor McDavid. He's tied with Nikita Kucherov in goal scoring. Like, he's scoring goals. The problem is there's nobody there below him to where the other team has to be a little bit concerned when they're on the ice. So anytime Kyrou's out on the ice, they can just say, okay, we're going to put our top defensive line out there, shut them down. Yeah. And they still can't 100% shut them down. But imagine you are in a situation where a team can't just key in on one line. Mm-hmm. Imagine how much that opens up for Kyrou, because there was that one season, you know, the 21-22 season when they did have the depth of scoring, but that was only Kyrou's second season. It was his first real full season in the NHL. He's got years under his belt now. We've talked about how much he's improved since then. Imagine what he could do now. Like, then you're talking about really unlocking a player, a top-end player in the NHL.
It all comes down to the centerman. Like, you go back to that roster, you know what they had down the middle? Ryan O'Reilly, Ivan Barbashev, and Braden Shen. Like, it all comes back to the centerman that you possess when you're playing, and that's what can catapult the wingers. And unfortunately for this team right now, they are kind of in a holding pattern when you get to the bottom six versus what they have in the top six. Can I shut something down, please, T-Bone?
Sure.
There's no goaltending controversy. Can we please stop this?
Well, hold on.
No, we're not going to hold on here. Everybody's texting in.
Hofer's been better.
I think Ed is the one that just sent the text.
Ed.
At some point, Jim Montgomery's going to have to realize his best goaltender sitting on the bench on a nightly basis.
Amen, Ed.
You know what, Ed? You're not wrong in terms of how Joel Hofer's been playing right now. And even Jordan Binnington would probably tell you it hasn't been great. You know what, Jordan Binnington, we can all agree Jordan Binnington was awesome last year, right?
Yeah.
We can all agree. You know what Jordan Binnington was from December 1st until December 31st? He was a .500 goaltender with an .881 save percentage. You know what he was from January 1st all the way until the end of the regular season? He was one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League with a .922 save percentage and 17-10-4 overall. Jordan Binnington going through a little bit of it right now. He's at an .897 save percentage right now for the team. Could I hear the argument that they're playing him a lot? Maybe. He's played the fifth most games in the National Hockey League. And we all know the best Jordan Binnington is a rested Jordan Binnington. And maybe you're using him a little bit too much right now for how many games that are being played. But there's no goaltending controversy. There is no question of, does Joel Hofer play the rest of the season instead of Jordan Binnington? I'd like to see Joel Hofer get a few more games. He's been playing well right now. But Binnington is still the guy, and Binnington will be the guy. I think he's just going through a little bit of a dry spell that most goaltenders hit once you hit the months of November and December.
Yeah, Benner's still clearly number one guy. I mean, he was pretty good last night. Now, granted, he would want that first goal back, but he was pretty good last night against the New Jersey Devils. Hofer is playing well, and I do think you're not at that point yet of, I wouldn't even call it a goalie controversy, because you do have a solid 1-2 punch.
Yeah, you should be that way.
I think by the time we get to January, if you're still seeing some scuffles from Jordan Binnington and you're not seeing him start to kind of have that bounce back, then I think there will be that conversation of the Blues of, okay, do we need to go more 50-50 split rather than what they're doing right now, which is, hey, Benner gets, 2 games, and then Hofer gets 1.
By the way, that's fine. Doing a 50-50 is fine for me. If Joel Hofer's playing well, that's not a problem. Like, everybody says it's a controversy, it's a big deal. It's not a big deal. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
You're resting your goaltender. You're going to get 2 goaltenders that are playing better because they're more rested.
You don't win in the National Hockey League unless you have Connor Hellebuck or Andrei Vasilevsky without going 2-1, 3-1 for your goaltending
But
tandem.
then Connor Hellebuck falls apart in the playoffs.
Yeah, because you use them too much.
And again, making the playoffs would be amazing for the Blues. Like, if they get there and Jordan Binnington is gassed, then that's fine. You weren't expected to go deep into the playoffs.
Somebody just texted too and said, well, Joel Hofer's getting easier matchups. I would disagree. Joel Hofer he's won 4 straight games. He beat the Rangers twice. He beat the Winnipeg Jets and beat the Vancouver Canucks. So he's getting hard matchups as well. And there's nothing wrong with looking at a Joel Hofer and saying, hey, I think we play you for a few more games. Over these next 3, I would not be surprised if Joel Hofer plays 2 and Binnington plays 1. But at some point, Jordan Binnington is going to get back to the same goaltender that he typically is in the second half of the season, and that's going to be a guy that you look at and you say, yep, we're going to ride this one for the rest of the way.
By the way, last year, the big statistic that everybody referenced when it comes to the year that Binnington had was the goals saved above expected. Now, he's not as good in that category this year as he was last year, but he's still 4.8 goals saved above expected, which is middle of the pack, 17th in the league, but he's better than goaltenders like Jacob Markstrom, Andrei Vasilevsky, Ilya Sorokin. Jeremy Swayman is the worst, which is wild because he was one of the best last year. But he's right there with some of the best goaltenders in the league when it comes to the goals saved above expected. Yeah. I do still think that this might be one of the struggling times for Jordan Binnington this season. And look, like I talked about this in postgame for that Flyers game. He had a .900 save percentage in that game. His stats weren't great, but I can tell you this, like, he had one of the best goaltending games I've seen in years.
Yeah.
He had a phenomenal game against the Flyers, but his save percentage wouldn't tell you that.
Yeah. Typically, Joe even mentioned this on the broadcast last night. Typically, the month of November and December are the hardest for players, and then once you hit January 1st, that's when you kind of get back into a different mode of hockey. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll get back into the Blues in 15, but coming up next, if the Cardinals can't move Nolan Arenado, what happens for a guy like Lars Nootbaar? Are they forced into playing him at a certain position? We'll discuss that and one player who might need an actual position in the starting lineup next on 101 ESPN. So what happens if the Cardinals can't move Nolan Arenado? Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. That's a question that we have ridden the roller coaster on this Arenado conversation to where it started, T-Bone. I think you and I are on the same page of like, nah, it's not going to happen. A little optimism seeped in. Winter meetings took place, and it's like, oh, yeah, Nolan Arenado is going to get moved. And then it's now back to, I don't know if Nolan Arenado is going to get moved. And then Derek Gould yesterday, who was on the Gas House Gang podcast, said, quote, Arenado has committed twice to the Cardinals when he has had a chance to get out. A third time he sought specifically a trade to them. This will be a fourth time where he gets to say, now I want to go because I can't go to a better, more appealing spot. I can move up in the standings, said Gould on the podcast. But if he says no, Cardinals love their guys who commit to St. Louis. What does a four-time commitment say about a player? So it's very possible that he says, look, I don't want to go to these places that are available to me. I'd rather stay here. My stuff's here. My family's here. I'd rather stay with the team that I've committed to. And frankly, I mean, you appreciate that when it comes to staying in St. Louis. But, man, there is a massive butterfly effect in terms of what that does to the team, because now you have to find a position for Nolan Gorman, which essentially is second base, which means now you have to find a position for Brendan Donovan, which would be in the outfield, more than likely one of the corner outfield spots. And then that brings you to Lars Nootbaar. And it sure seems like, T-Bone, that if this trickle-down effect takes place, Arenado at third, Gorman at second, Donovan in left, Lars Nootbaar becomes your everyday center fielder. And I don't know if there's any other way you work around that. Alec Burleson's your first baseman / DH, with Wilson Contreras playing first base and maybe a little bit more catcher. This does really impact the motion that the Cardinals can accomplish with this reset this offseason.
Yeah, if they can't move Nolan Arenado, they will have to seriously consider the question of, is Nootbaar our starting center fielder? Because they don't want to, right? They want it to be Michael Ciani or Victor Scott, depending if he shows that he's ready for the big leagues. It sounds like they're going to be more cautious this time around and say, hey, go take a year at AAA level, but let's stick with Michael Ciani in center field. Well, if you did do that and Arenado is still here, well, he is getting 600 plate appearances at third base. There are no questions asked. He will be the third baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals. Well, that means I've got to figure out how to get at-bats for Nolan Gorman, Brendan Donovan, Alec Burleson, Lars Nootbaar. If you wanted to throw Thomas Ajayci in here, you can. 5 guys then for essentially 3 spots in second, left, and DH. And that's if you don't decide to go with Nootbaar in center field. I think you have to seriously consider it if you can't move on from Nolan Arenado. And I know, to me, Nootbaar's not a center fielder. To me, he is more of a corner outfielder. But I don't think this is like with Buchnevich at center, right? Where Buch was clearly in a spot where he didn't really know where to go defensively. He didn't really know what to do offensively because he's playing a position that's not natural to him. That shouldn't impact Lars Nootbaar's bat at the plate if he is playing in center field. He's even made the argument, hey, I can maybe stay healthier if I play center field because I don't run into more walls when I'm in left and right.
Understandable.
I'm not necessarily sure I buy that, but okay, I could at least hear an argument on it.
Didn't he crack a rib from diving in a game?
Hitting a wall. That's what it was.
Was it a wall? I thought it was just diving.
I think he broke a rib when he landed on a baseball, too.
That's what it was.
That could happen in center. But I digress. I think if you don't move on from Arenado, the best path forward for the Cardinals would be to go with Contreras at first, Gorman at second, Wynn at short, Arenado third, Donnie in left, Newton in center, Walker in right field, and then you can have Burley be the DH at getting every day at bats, and then maybe against lefties you end up platooning him with Sajasi.
And you got Ivan Herrera behind the plate.
Yeah, Herrera Paz will split behind the plate.
Yeah,
that's how you get the answer still if Arenado's here. Now it's more complicated. It means, well, what do we do with Michael Ciani? Again, in a retool year where you're not trying to worry about wins and losses, I don't really care about what you look like defensively.
Well, and does it matter about, you're not trying to develop Michael Ciani. Like, you're trying to develop Victor Scott. And Lars Nootbaar playing in center field keeps Victor Scott in the minor leagues. And guess what? If Nootbaar gets hurt or if something doesn't work out in the outfield, you've got Michael Ciani to jump in and play like he did last season. Like, I don't view Michael Ciani as one of the building blocks of this team in terms of being competitive. That's Victor Scott, who should be in the minors. So, like, this works out well for the team. Do I love this? Absolutely not, because I would love Brendan Donovan at second base, Nolan Gorman at third base, and then your outfield set. We'll get to why in just a couple of minutes. But in terms of those pieces, if Arenado's there, you still have all of the guys that are getting the everyday at-bats that you need. It's really down to the Cardinals' commitment of, if they struggle, we're keeping them in their positions rather than saying, nope, not good, send them down.
Well, I think the question becomes of, with Siani then is, okay, so what we just said is, if it is a retool year, you don't really care about wins and losses, right? I mean, they would love to make the playoffs, but it's more about what you just said there, right? Keep these guys at the big leagues, continue to get them at-bats. Well, if I want Nootbaar to be a guy that's part of this future, I want to find out if he is a part of the future. They've already kind of said, hey, Victor Scott, center field is his job as long as he develops. So it doesn't really matter then of Siani. Siani is a defensive-minded glove first, which you do need when you're a winning team, but you're not really a team that's trying to win. I fear that if they can't move Arenado, they'll get stuck back into what you're talking about. Not so much as setting guys down, but more of the mindset of, oh, well, we still have Arenado, we've still got Gray, we've still got Contreras. We think we're still more competitive than people think. So let's go with our best defensive option, which is Siani in center.
And that comes down to Ollie's then. That comes down to Ollie. Like, you can't take that mindset. Because as much as you want to win, the front office is telling you.
Well, see, this is where we get caught in between. And this is what my whole thing was with Bannister, right? The whole idea was, Bannister, you need to play Bolduc. Well, if I'm Drew Bannister when I was the head coach of the Blues, I'm looking at the front office going, no, my job's to win hockey games. To me, Bolduc is not a guy that wins us hockey games. And that will be the same conversation Ali Marmol will be having, right? Of, well, you need to be playing Lars Nootbaar in center field because we've got Arenado, we've got to get at-bats for all these guys. And if you're Ali Marmol, you're not worried about the development, right? Ollie's job is not to make sure that Lars Nootbaar is the franchise cornerstone piece for the Cardinals or it's Nolan Gorman. Ollie's job is to put the best lineup out there and win baseball games.
Yeah, but you went defensive-minded first last season and you lost. Like, you went with the best options in terms of defense first.
And they tried their best offense in 23 and lost. Totally.
And that's why you're in this position now where you've got to figure out what you've got. And at the end of the day, if we're talking about Lars Nootbaar being in and out of the lineup, I don't think Lars Nootbaar is one of the difference makers in terms of this team's future. I think those are Walker, Gorman, Mason Wynn. Those are the three guys, at least in my opinion, that are going to change. And it doesn't seem like it's being impacted very much if Arenado is still here. Now, in terms of the position, would I like to have Nolan Gorman playing third base because in 2 years he's probably going to be doing that position? Absolutely. But you're kind of stuck in this position with Nolan Arenado. But there's one other wrinkle in this conversation. And this is where I think it does impact what they're trying to accomplish with this refresh. What happens with Thomas Saggese? Now, I know he's Luke and Baker to you, T-Bone. That was sarcasm.
He'd be in the Luke or Baker role for me, which is a bench bat. Which, by the way, them selling Baker to Japan, ridiculous, but whatever.
Whatever with that one. Here's the thing, though. Like, Thomas Saggese is doing everything possible in the offseason to force his name into the conversation of should this guy be getting opportunities at the big league level. I don't know if people have seen his Arizona Fall League numbers, but so far, at the Arizona Fall League, 82 plate appearances. He's got a .391 batting average with 2 home runs, 10 RBIs, a .524 on-base percentage, a .594 slugging percentage, and almost a 1,200 OPS in the Arizona Fall League. Now, why is that important? We all remember Jordan Walker's Arizona Fall League. These are better numbers than Jordan Walker. Not the home runs, but overall the numbers. These are better numbers than what Mason Wynn put up at the Arizona Fall League. If Nolan Arenado is here, I don't think Thomas Saggese is here, unless you're using him as a bench bat, and something tells me the Cardinals are going to say, no, we want a lot more reps than just sitting him on the bench throughout a season. To whereas if Arenado is not here, I think Thomas Saggese might actually be a piece at the major league level this season.
Yeah, I think there's still potentially a role if Arenado's here, but you're right. They may go more the approach of let's get him seasoning still at the AAA level. And again, I've always been on the side of I don't necessarily mind that. If Stacey's not on the big league roster, it doesn't really affect me. And look, those Arizona Fall League numbers, yeah, they're really good. I mean, you mentioned they're better than Jordan Walker's. And Walker had a pretty good Fall League
he did.
A couple of years ago.
You got to the big leagues because of it.
Yeah, I don't look too much into what they're doing at the Fall League right now because Saggese is not going up against some of the best pitching prospects. A lot of teams like to hold back their pitching prospects because of fear of arm injuries. I just look at this as, hey, you know what? He's doing what he should be doing. If he is a top-end prospect, then yeah, he's doing what he needs to be doing, which is hitting, taking advantage of mistakes against younger guys that are still trying to build up some innings. I don't necessarily think this will play into what they're doing because you mentioned Walker. Walker had the good Arizona Fall League. It didn't necessarily guarantee him his spot coming out of spring training. He had a really good spring training that led to him making the team. We saw Victor Scott have an incredible Fall League as well. Well, as we saw, Victor Scott wasn't ready for the big league. So I don't read too much into what he's doing, even though it is very impressive. I don't think roster decisions, and I still say about this, I don't think roster decisions need to be made of, hey, we've got to get 400 to 500 plate appearances for Thomas Saggese. I think that would be a mistake by the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, the numbers are at the Arizona Fall League, like Tebow mentioned, you aren't going up against the best. And once you get into spring training, you get a little bit of better of idea. But it is pretty interesting in terms of what this reset looks like for a Cardinals team if you can move Nolan Arenado versus if you can't move Nolan Arenado. And then it really comes down to what's the messaging still for a team, because the worst case scenario is this team falls back into the trap of like, well, we actually got a pretty competitive team. We think we can go out there in the NL Central and at least be a playoff squad, and now you're just kicking the can down the road for one more season. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, the power play had another opportunity to impact the game last night, and it not only missed, but it didn't even get a shot on goal. It's been a problem, but is it time to make some changes? There's one area that Joe Vitale talked about last night that I want to get the guys' thoughts on next here on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. The 500 hockey continues for the Blues as they fall last night to the Devils by a final of 4-1. Blues now 15-3 on the season, 33 points, 3 points back of the final wild card spot in the Western Conference. They will look to increase their points with that as they have a back-to-back tomorrow and then on Friday in Florida. Tampa Bay tomorrow, pregame at 5 o'clock, and then also pregame at 5 o'clock on Friday against the Panthers. I'm Grant Francis. The Sports Center updates have been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
So we talked about the power play yesterday for St. Louis and how, really there's no changes from where they were with Drew Bannister to Jim Montgomery. It's still floating around 16.7%. It's gaining a lot more opportunities in terms of zone time, but the shots / the conversion just isn't there. With Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. I've been keeping track of this all season because I just find it as an interesting nugget. When the Blues have an opportunity to tie the game with a power play, how many times have they converted? Last night, they had their 20th opportunity of the season when they've had the chance to tie the game on the power play, and they don't convert. They have only converted twice this season. So 2 out of 20 opportunities, the power play has gone to tie hockey games. So 18 of those chances they have not scored / they haven't even gained more than a shot in those. They're averaging about 1 shot per power play with a chance to tie the hockey game. So you hear those and you're like, okay, probably need to change it. But how do you change it? Because it's got Kyrou, it's got Booch, it's got Thomas, it's got Neighbors. It's got your best guys out there on the ice, but it's still not working. This was Joe Vitale on the broadcast last night.
Well, I think personally that you keep going with your big horses. I think you have to, but I do think some inner line switching is appropriate. And I said it before the game, and I'll stand by it. I think we're in a game now away from, you give the young lad from Anaheim an opportunity on Cam Fowler to step in there as a left-handed shot who's certainly run a power play plenty in his career.
He's got 183 points in his career playing on the power play. Cam Fowler does. Justin Falk, who has been that number 1 defenseman this season without Torrey Krug, in his career is about 103 points on the power play. So vastly different. Almost same amount of times played in the National Hockey League. Here's the thing, though, with Cam Fowler. He's a left-handed shot. And Joe referenced in that conversation, you can hear the full conversation up on the Curbside podcast, but he referenced how a conversation he had with Booch was talking about how impactful it is to have a left-handed shot defenseman on the power play. And Falk is a right shot defenseman. So I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen. But there's got to be some mixing with this top power play unit because going out there and not getting a shot on goal with an opportunity to tie the hockey game is just inexcusable.
Yeah, I've said this all season long. I don't know if they've got the pieces, or let me rephrase that. I don't think they have the pieces in terms of a personnel standpoint to give themselves a good power play. I think they're going to be near the bottom of the league all season long. I will say this, though. What would it hurt to change it up, right? It's not working with Justin Falk. Justin Falk quarterbacking that top power play unit. He's got just 4 power play points this season. He's only got 9 points in total this year. It's not been a good year for Justin Falk, both at even strength and on the power play as that top quarterback. We've seen Broberg. He's had, just a couple of times where he's been.
A cup of coffee up there.
Yeah, and even then, it didn't work with Broberg. I wouldn't mind if he wanted to throw him up there, but I don't see the harm in trying it with Fowler. I really don't, because worst case scenario, it looks like it has, and it hasn't been good already. So then you can maybe change it up once again. See if you find somebody else. Maybe go back to having Thomas run the quarterback of the power play, which they did for a little bit there. I don't see the harm in doing it because worst case scenario, you just find out he's not the guy that's going to be that quarterback. Yeah. Best case scenario, you do. You find out he's a guy that can help bring some kind of new element to this power play that has struggled. And when we talk about their struggles at 5-on-5 offensively, Well, if you're going to struggle 5-on-5 offensively, you need to have a really good power play. And they don't have that, and that's why you're really seeing them struggle to score goals, and it's why they're bottom 10 in the NHL in goals per game.
This is going to be, I think it needs to go beyond Cam Fowler, though. Like, I'm with Joe. I would try it with Cam Fowler. It's a left-handed defenseman. It has been a power play quarterback for a long time. And you know what? It's a guy that just gets pucks on net, and I think that's a good thing to have. I would go beyond that, though. I would mix and match some of these units. It's been Neighbors, Buchnevich, Thomas, Kyrou for a long period of time, and it has not worked. I would take Kyrou off of it. And this is no shot against Jordan Kyrou saying that he's bad. I just think you need to change the scenery. I think what happens when Kyrou, Thomas, and Buchnevich are on the ice for a power play is you try and get too cute with it. You try and do the drop pass and into the drop pass of the zone entry, and you try and outskill the defenseman over the blue line, and it gets picked off and it's down the other end. When you're in the zone, it looks great, but getting into the zone is a problem. I think you take a Kyrou off of it and you put him on a power play unit with a Bolduc and Shen and a Sundqvist, Saad, whomever you want that net front presence. That would be a unit in terms of I got shots from both sides of the ice. Goaltenders are going to have to figure out what the hell to do because I got Kyrou, I got Bolduc, I got my net front presence. And what you're doing with that top unit, if Fowler's out there, is you're going to have a Pavel Buchnevich and a Dylan Holloway who keep things a little bit more simple with Robert Thomas. Does Thomas keep it simple? I don't know. But what I don't like, and if you don't like the idea of Kyrou coming off, maybe you take Buch off and you move him down. But I don't like the idea of having those three on the ice on a power play because on the power play, you got to keep things simple. And right now, it feels like they're doing too much on it.
Yeah, I don't mind the idea if you want to juggle it up. I would go more the Buch route than Kyrou, since Kyrou leads the team in points so far on the power play. But granted, he's only got 2 power play goals, which is tied for second, which goes to show you where you're at as a power play.
Yeah, it's not good.
2 goals is tied for second on the team in power play goals so far this year. But again, you've got to try something new. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is when you've got those 3 guys out there. They're not as crisp, clean with it, quick as you're saying, kind of keeping it simple. But it might be one of those things where these power plays need to do that. Why? Because they don't have the shot. When you say keep it simple, what do I think of immediately? Think back to those Blues power plays that had Perron on it, right? It was as simple as can be. Work the puck to Perron, boom, one-time shot attempt. Maybe you go the other side. There's Tarasenko, boom, one-time shot attempt. Or he could settle the puck down, quickly get that wrister that was so elite for many years here in St. Louis, get that towards goal. They don't have the personnel to do that, which is why I wonder if some of what you're talking about, because I agree to an extent what you're saying of they don't keep it simple at times. It feels a little fancy at times where it's, okay, we got to go for this cross-ice pass that gets picked off, or we try to skate into the zone, we get cut off at the blue line, boom, puck's going back down the other end, and you don't see them generate any shots. I think that's just because they have to do that, right? If this team's going to score on the power play, it's going to have to look maybe a little fancier than most teams because there is no simple, hey, just pass the puck over here. This guy's got one hell of a slap shot. He's going to put it right past the goalie. They don't have that kind of personnel, and it's why even though we're talking about these changes, I don't think it's going to have a major impact. I don't think it hurts to try, though, because it can't get much worse from here. So it's worth at least exploring, maybe pulling off a Buchnevich or a Kyrou and going with Fowler up top.
We got Hemdy on our YouTube chat, our graveyard chat, who says, you don't take your best goal scorer off of your number 1 power play unit. I get it. But Dylan Holloway has the same amount of power play goals as Jordan Kyrou. To T-Bone's point, you're tied for first. Dylan Holloway has 2 power play goals. And you know what Dylan Holloway does? He keeps things simple on the ice. And again, I don't even know if this is Kyrou. This might be a Thomas. This just might be all 3 of them on the ice. But a power play that's trying to do too much is a power play that's not getting any shots on goal. And if you're not getting shots on a power play, what's the point?
I think part of that, too, is the quarterback on the power play. Like, I think that's the biggest part of it. And that's why when Joey says something about Cam Fowler going there, that excites me a little bit. And I look back at Torrey Krug last season. He had 37 shots on goal on the power play. Justin Falk right now has 10. And so, I mean, we're getting close to that halfway point of the season now. We're only 9 games away from it.
Yeah.
Only 10 shots on goal on the power play. That's not enough. What I would like to see, and I've never coached hockey, I've never played hockey, but what I would like to see is with Jake Neighbors at the front of the net, and we've seen what he can do at the front of the net. Last season, he really started to take off whenever he was put at the front of the net. Just get pucks there. Like, I don't think they need to shoot to score all the time, just shoot to get the puck on net and create a rebound for Jake Neighbors, because that's what he's good at. And if he doesn't score, Jake Neighbors is also good at retrieving those pucks, getting those pucks back. And when you do that, you create havoc. The penalty kill gets all out of sorts a little bit. That opens up lanes for players like Jordan Kyrou to get a shot off. So what I would like to see more is just getting the puck on net. I looked last season when Drew Bannister took over, and one of the big things for Drew Bannister that really advocated for him last season was the improvement on the power play, because it was abysmal under Craig Berube at the beginning of the season last year. Shots on goal on the power play for Drew Bannister. You've got 3-1, 3-3. Those were the first games. But then 9, 11, 5, 8, 7, 12. This year, under Jim Montgomery so far, these are the last few games. You got 0, 1, 2, 2, 4, 2, 3. Like, you're just not getting enough shots on goal.
You're not.
You're not.
And like, I'm looking at these. So Kyrou has 19 shots on the power play this season. So, like, good, but considering how many power plays that you've had, not great. But then look at the drop-off. Neighbors with 11, which Neighbors doesn't get a whole lot of shots if you're not getting it on net, to Grant's point.
Yeah.
10 for Shen, 10 for Pavel Buchnevich, 7 for Dylan Holloway, 6 for Bolduc, 4 for Robert Thomas, 9 for Justin Falk. What's the best power play in the National Hockey League right now? It's the Edmonton Oilers, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right, yeah.
So if you look at Edmonton in terms of like the shots that they are putting on the power play this year, the best guys on the ice start with their defensemen. Evan Bouchard is sitting there with 18 shots on goal, right behind Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So to Grant's point, if your power play quarterback's not getting shots on goal, how can you expect everyone else to? So, again, we'll have to wait to find out. They don't practice today. I doubt you make any significant changes, but I like Joe's thoughts to where you might start to see a consideration of a Cam Fowler at least starting off on that unit and then build from there. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, the Junk Drawer here on 101 ESPN.
it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
All right, let's dive into the junk drawer as T-Bone's got a story for us today.
Guys, I've got a question for you.
I'm good at these.
You know, when you go someplace, maybe you meet up with somebody before the holidays, maybe they give you your, gift bag early, right?
Friend gift or something like that, like your friends
exactly.
get together? Yeah.
Here's my question. When they give it to you, are you supposed to look at it right then and there? Or is the right thing to say, thank you, have your conversation with them, then take it back to the car, and then you can look at it when you get home? What's the proper way to go about this? Because I feel kind of awkward just looking around in it.
I have to be the wrong person to ask about this, but under no circumstances do I open the gift in front of the person. If they hand it to me, I will not open it in front of you. I will say thank you. I'll open this when I get home, and then I will reach out to them. I do this because I'm an Italian, and I speak with my eyes and facial reactions.
You should work on that.
Yeah, probably. I have VK's tone with my face. I have had so many instances where I'll open something, and they'll be like, oh, you don't like it. And I didn't say anything. I'm like, what? Oh, you don't like it.
I love these socks.
I actually do love socks. Socks and undershirts right now. It's a weird thing I'm all about.
Underwear, and I was
not underwear. Although underwear is probably always good too. But I will not open it in front of a friend because they can see it and I don't want to make them upset. So I'll say, hey, thank you. I'm going to take this home and open it when I can actually focus on it rather than just rip through it. And then I'll send them a text or give them a phone call and tell them how much I loved it. I can't open it in front of a person. It's so freaking uncomfortable.
I feel kind of bad if I just take the bag and put it in the car and then, drive home with it and do what you're talking about, open it up there at home. But also I do feel okay, do I have to really dig through this bag, look at everything that's in it?
You gotta read the card, see if there's something else. And then that awkward moment where you pull the gift out and you're like, oh, thank you. And they're like, oh, there's something else in the bag. Or I look for something else and oh, that's it. It's so freaking uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. Yesterday I went with the peek in the bag, saw everything that was in there, and said, "Well, thank you, I appreciate this."
Yes.
But again, am I supposed to do that? What's the and at a birthday? When I go to a birthday dinner, on my birthday this past year, we went to a restaurant. I met up with some family, and the gift's sitting there on the table when I arrive. So, do I have to, immediately dig into it and say, oh, well, thank you for whatever the gift might be? Or do I have to, sit down, pretend I don't see it, wait till the dinner's over, and then dive into it? No, maybe I'm the only one, but I never know how to handle those situations.
Unless it's family, because, it's family, so it's I'm fine with them staring at me while I open my gift. I will not open something while you're staring at me. It's just weird. I don't it's the same thing when a waitress or a waiter comes by your table while you're mid-food and they're like, oh, does everything taste well? How am I supposed to answer that? I'm eating right now. Or when you're...
Just nod your head.
Did you ever have that? Sure, but it's still uncomfortable. Did you ever have it when you would go try on shoes? I know this is probably so beyond people now, but when you'd go into Foot Locker or something and you'd ask to try on a shoe, and they would bring it, and then they would stand there and watch you put it on. I'm like, I please don't hover. It's the same way with gifts. I'll open it when I get home. I really appreciate you thinking of me, and then I'll call them once I open up the gift.
That never bothered me, but I don't know.
I hate hovering.
I don't know
Maybe
why.
that's it.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I despise.
I'm shocked that you haven't freaked out in our office because we're right next to each other.
Well, you've seen me in the past of when we used to be in the old office and someone would stand behind me and talk.
You'd freak out.
I'm please just stand in front of me. I don't like people behind me, and I don't like people hovering.
Yeah, I don't know why, but the shoe one doesn't bother me as much. But
I used to hate it.
The gift one, I feel like you're obligated to do it, right? If that's not a gift that they're bringing out, you're shopping there for a new shoe. Or if you trying on clothes or someone happened to be standing out there seeing if, oh, did you like that or not? The gift thing is where it's okay, this person has gone out of their way to spend money on me to give me something. What's the correct way to respond to this?
I despise it all.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think the gift thing bothers me.
Oh no, I'm good with no matter what. I just don't like people staring. That's probably the solution on my end. Which, you know what? That's on me. get over it, right, Ferrario? That's what typically people would say. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up at 15, we'll get to more likely to happen. You send us 2 scenarios. We will tell you which is more likely to happen. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. Coming up next, though, how do the Blues stack up against the Western Conference, and how do they stack up against competitive teams? We'll get to that and the struggles at home next on 101 ESPN. It's time to get with the right insurance company. It's time to get the insurance agent that is taking care of you and your family. And that is Tracy Bibb. Alex Ferrario back with you. Tracy and her team at Allstate have been taking care of the Ferrario household since 2016. The household and the Ferrario vehicles. All of those thanks to Tracy Bibb. 1, protected. 2, saving us money when it comes to car insurance. And that's why I love working with Tracy Bibb. Always in communication with us, talking about, hey, prices might hike in this area. This is what we can do. This is going to happen on this end. And when there's problems, because there are problems that arise for cars, for homes, she's available for you to get the problem resolved. So call Tracy today. You get incredible customer service when it comes to her and her team over at Allstate. 314-328-4260. Just tell Tracy you heard Alex Ferrario talk about it on 101 ESPN. She'll walk you through the free non-committal quote. Super simple. And you've got the best when it comes to your insurance coverage. 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb. So it's hard to really have a firm answer on this because the Blues' first half of the season is like broken up into several different segments. One of them is Bannister versus Montgomery. The other is Eastern Conference versus Western Conference. And then you also got to put into the odd scheduling that's taken place in the month of December. Those might sound like excuses to a lot of people, but that's just how I segment out the hockey season for St. Louis. But it was a conversation that I heard the Fast Lane have a couple of days ago after that Dallas Stars game on Saturday, where Anthony Stalter asked the question, did that Dallas Stars game kind of show you where the Blues are in terms of against the other teams in the Western Conference, specifically some of those power teams in the Western Conference. And surprisingly, the Blues have struggled against the Central Division this year. I don't know why. The 2 games against the Minnesota Wild, the 1 game against the Winnipeg Jets, you haven't seen most of the Central Division. I believe it's 4 teams that you haven't seen in the Central Division yet this season, but you lose in overtime to the Dallas Stars. You lost in a back-and-forth game against the Utah Hockey Club, and you haven't played Chicago, Nashville, or Colorado yet. But I don't know if it's just me and the homerism that people claim that I have. Does it feel like it's that vastly of a difference between the Blues and the rest of the Western Conference? And maybe some of this is because you just haven't played a lot of games against the Western Conference yet, and you're going to get a really good taste of that from January 1st on. But you beat Winnipeg. Both games against the Minnesota Wild were 1-goal games, with the exception of the empty net in one of them. Dallas Stars, you lost in overtime. Utah, with the exception of the empty net, was a 1-goal game. And then even over in the Pacific Division, 1-goal game against Vegas, haven't taken on LA. Edmonton, you almost made the comeback. You beat Vancouver, you beat Calgary, you beat Seattle, and you've beaten San Jose twice. It just doesn't feel like it's that different between the Blues and the rest of the Western Conference. But please tell me I'm being a homer.
So when you look at what they have done, it's hard to look at just the resume itself, right? By looking at records of, okay, this is why you might think that or why you would go against that. Because, again, I'm going with just playoff teams, right? The teams that are in the playoff picture, both in the Western Eastern Conference right now as of today, the Blues are 9-10-1 in those games. That's pretty respectable against playoff opponents so far this year, both in West and East. But then you look at where they are against non-playoff teams, 6-5-2. You'd like that to be a little bit better, so that's a little odd. But then to your question of, okay, well, if I think that they can compete with the best teams in the West, why are they 1-4-1 in the division? And that's where it's a little odd for me. So my answer to, are the Blues that far back of some of the best teams in the Western Conference? I'm actually going to go with yes, and it's because we don't see them scoring at 5-on-5.
Yeah.
Because of their offense, and we haven't seen them, to your point, play a lot of these Western Conference teams, which I do think is covering up some of this. I do think they are a significant step back from some of the best in the West. Now, the wild card teams, I think they're kind of right there with them. Like, you look at that Western Conference wild card picture, Calgary, Vancouver, Colorado, Utah, those 4 teams that are ahead of you for the wild card, I think you're right in line with them. And that's why I think, like, I wouldn't bet on them to be a playoff team, but I can see how the Blues sneak their way into this playoff picture. But I think when you're talking about the Jets, the Wild, the Stars, Vegas, LA, and Edmonton, I don't think the Blues are close to those teams. I think there is a significant gap between the top 6 teams and the St. Louis Blues and everybody that's in this muddy wild card picture.
Once again, I segmented a little bit because I agree with you. Offensively, you're night and day different from these teams. Like, Winnipeg has scored 121 goals already this season. Vegas, 108. Minnesota barely at 100. And then the St. Louis Blues are the goals this season of sitting at 85. So, like, different in the offense. But on the other side of the ice, I do feel like defensively you're a pretty tight team compared to some of these. Goaltending, I'd give you the upper hand in a lot of these categories. But isn't that all that really matters right now for this team, T-Bone? To be closer to the wild card groups in the Western Conference than those top teams? Because, look, Winnipeg, winning window. Vegas, winning window. Edmonton, Minnesota, winning window. If I'm talking about Colorado and Calgary and Vancouver and L.A., I at least would consider that a success, where a lot of people looked at it as they were supposed to be nowhere near those guys a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing that they're not with those teams, to your question, because you're right. They're not in a winning window right now. I think if you asked Doug Armstrong where he would want to be, it would be more in line. Well, of course, he'd always say in a winning window.
Right.
But I think if you asked him this year, hey, where do you want to be? It's clear they've made it, hey, we want to be in that wild card conversation. And they're there as a team. They belong in this conversation of, hey, can you look at the Blues and find their path to the playoffs? The answer to that question is yes. Now, I think it's harder because they don't have the 5-on-5 offense, and I went on about this yesterday. I don't know if you can win with this defensive, shutdown, grinded-out style of hockey in the current landscape of the NHL, because it is so tough, because offense is at a higher rate than it was a decade ago when they last tried this with Ken Hitchcock during the retool. But I think they're where they belong. You know, I don't look at like Utah, Colorado, Calgary, Vancouver, and I go, whoa, you're way behind those teams. No, they've taken the right steps to close the gap on them as they continue to build forward to try and get to their next winning window.
I think as I look at this, the division is a foregone conclusion. Like, they're not competing for the top 3 spots. I would even argue it's going to be very tough to compete with Colorado for that top wild card spot, or whichever team Colorado passes in the top 3 of the Central, especially with them having an actual goaltender now. So you're looking at that final wild card. Are they better than Utah? Yeah, I think so. I think they're 5th in this division. I think that's almost a lock for the Blues this season, is 5th in the Central, which could be good enough because I don't think the Pacific is good enough to get that final wild card. I don't think Calgary is good enough. I think Calgary maybe has played their best hockey this season. I can see them taking a step back. Vancouver's the one that I'm like, that one might be tough because I feel as if Vancouver maybe has played their worst hockey of the season. I could see Vancouver getting better. And if that's the case, then it's going to make it difficult to reach them.
Yeah.
That's where I look at the Western Conference and I'm like, can the Blues match up against the Canucks? That's the one where I'm like, I don't know.
Well, and what it's going to come down to is who's superior in one area of the game. And one area that the Blues have fallen massively short in is their home ice play. Now, surprisingly, the Utah Hockey Club has been just as bad, which who would have thought that was going to happen for a team that gets to go to a new place that's excited about them, and they're under 500. But the Blues are 6-8-1 so far on home ice this season. They've played 15 games, and I believe before the end of the year, they'll have played 17 games. So that means in the final, 42 games of the season, they're going to have to play 24 of those on home ice. Might be bad math by me, so apologize if it is. You have a lot of games on home ice, and specifically a lot of games against the Western Conference from January 1st on. So if you want to find a way to exploit those other teams in terms of a playoff push, it's going to have to come from you being good on home ice.
Yeah, they're going to have to pick it up on home ice because of their struggles so far this year. And we looked at this. It's one of those where they're getting off to those slow starts, right? I think you said they've given up the first goal in 10 of 15 games. And I loved what Monty said yesterday post-game about, hey, we didn't get the crowd involved in the game. When you think about having your home ice advantage, why is it so tough to play in St. Louis in years past? Because this place is a rambunctious group of fans is basically what he said.
He called the fans crazy, which is a
good thing.
Good thing. Good crazy.
And when you think about the Blues home games, the fact that we could kind of say without knowing the numbers in the office prior to show of, doesn't it feel like they've been behind a lot at home, which pulls the fans out of the game? And we were right. 10 of 15 games they've fallen behind. In those 5 games that they have, they're 3-2.
Yeah.
So they'll have to improve on home ice. And when they play against the Western Conference, that's where you'll really find out where they end up falling in this hierarchy. And you're right. Can they find something in their game to be quote unquote elite at, right? Yeah. Why did they have a chance at the playoffs last year as for the Blues? Because they had elite goaltending. Is that going to be the same thing that gets you there? Is it the defense is going to be so shut down? It'd be shocking. But does the offense finally find a rhythm, become an elite factor here in the final, whatever it is, 40 plus games of the season? You got to have something you can put your hat on and say, this is where we're going to be good at and win these hockey games.
Well, and here's the other thing too. You can look at this as a positive and a negative because the Blues have been really good at once they get to overtime getting that second point.
Yeah.
But the negative side of that is you look at games like Calgary, Vancouver, teams that you are trying to pass in the standings and you're giving them a point in those games. Like you can't close those out in regulation. The Blues have 9 regulation wins this season, only 1 ahead of Nashville.
Yeah.
Like they have not won very often in regulation. And when you're going up against teams like Vancouver, like Calgary, you're trying to pass them, those 1-point games become a lot more difficult rather than making it, a 2-point game.
8 of the 13 games in January are played on home ice, and of those 8, 6 of them are against the Western Conference, and 5 of those 6 are against teams that are above you in the standings. That's how you catch up ground with teams in the National Hockey League. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, Alex Ferrario. We'll ask that to Chris Kerber coming up in about 15 minutes. But coming up next, you send us 2 scenarios. We will tell you which one is more likely to happen. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646 here on 101 ESPN. Alex Ferrario with you to talk about Circa Sports Illinois. It's the betting app you need to download as we get closer to the weekend with all of the college football playoff action and plenty of great odds for you over on Circa Sports Illinois app. So much so that you need to start looking at some of these futures in terms of odds to winning the championship in the college football playoffs. Because when you compare some of these lines to other sports books, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, you see why Circa is always the go-to. Like Boise State. Maybe you're going out on a massive limb that Boise State goes on a tear. They're plus 4,800 on the Circa Sports Illinois app. If you go do that on DraftKings or FanDuel, sitting at plus 4,500. So you're getting better odds thanks to Circa Sports Illinois. And whether it's those futures bets or maybe you're putting together those big parlays that I always like to do, Circa's great because they don't limit you based off of winnings and they're keeping as little money as possible. So download the app today. Get set for all the college football action over the weekend, all the NFL action over the weekend with Circa Sports Illinois. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234. Ooh, 314-399-9646 Air Comfort Service text line, along with Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. My voice is wearing thin. Like, believe it or not, might be brutal tomorrow.
Oh, dude, don't say that.
My voice is going down south.
You gotta show up and perform tomorrow.
You know what?
It's the only
You're right.
time that it matters.
You're right. I'm just gonna have to take care of it myself. I'll be better. I'll be better about this tomorrow. But that did not sound good.
BKS excuse. Like,
Yeah,
what
you're
is
right.
that?
You're right. I'll do a little bird cheer. You send us two scenarios. We will tell you which one is more likely to happen here on BK and Ferrario. I will start, gentlemen. More likely to happen, the Blues have a 500-plus point percentage in the second half of the season, or they pick top 10 in the National Hockey League draft. So plus 500 point percentage in the second half of the year from January 1st until the end of the year, or they're selecting top 10 in the NHL draft.
I will go above 500 point percentage. It'll probably be like 501. But
Damn it, that's a loophole.
I don't, because I don't think they're one of the 10 worst teams in the NHL. Now, their offense is, but I think everything that we've seen from them, they're like middle of the pack in everything. Middle of the pack at winning it on home ice. Middle of the pack when it comes to beating non-playoff teams. Middle of the pack when it comes to beating playoff teams.
They are 2 points away from being the 8th worst team in the National Hockey League.
Yeah,
That's how wild this season has been.
I think they're right around a 500 team, which is better than I thought going into the year. So I will say more likely they finish with a above 500 points percentage in the second half.
I think it's above 500 in the second half of the season. I don't think they're going to be bad enough. Like I said earlier, I think the floor for this team is going to be similar to where they were last year, battling in the final two for that wild card spot. I don't think they're going to be below 500 second half of the season, especially with more time under Montgomery. I think they just improve.
T-Bone?
Guys, more likely to be the Blues' third-line centerman post-trade deadline.
Okay.
Dalibor Dvorsky or someone from outside the organization?
Post-trade deadline?
Yeah.
Someone from the outside the organization. I'm starting to really wonder if Trent Frederick's going to be a Blue. I see it. I understand it. But I'm also trying to figure out how he fits in beyond this season. But you know what? That's a problem for after this season if you're Doug Armstrong. I think they're going to do everything they can to keep Dalibor Dvorsky in the minors this year. I don't think they want to rush him to this. And you know what? Trent Frederick was awesome with Jim Montgomery in 2 years in Boston. And check out the new episode of Last Minute Blues podcast, which dropped a shout out. But JR even said he's reached out to Fluto, the athletic Boston Bruins insider, and Fluto said, like, Trent Frederick and Jim Montgomery had an incredible relationship. So I'm gonna say it's more likely that it's somebody from the outside, and they go out there and find a way to make a move for Trent Frederick.
I think so too. I'd almost think that Jimmy Snuggerud might be more likely than Dalibor Dvorsky to play for the Blues this year.
I agree with that.
And I don't think they would do both of them at the same time.
Interesting.
So I think I would go. I think it would be more likely that a guy like Trent Frederick specifically would be here before Dalibor Dvorsky would.
Yeah.
I lean towards more likely somebody outside the organization just because I've already seen Army push a little bit this season, right? Yeah. If you would have asked me that prior to the Cam Fowler trade, I probably would have said, I don't know what the Blues will do. I could see where they don't do much at the deadline. Maybe they sell off a piece or two, and then there's the path for Dvorsky. Army's kind of tipped his hand twice now in season. He fired Drew Bannister and hired Jim Montgomery, and he also acquired Cam Fowler already by making a trade and giving up with a future second-round pick. So I think it is more likely to be someone from outside the organization.
Well, and not only that, but you have teams as well, like the Rangers, like the Predators, who were supposed to be really good this year. Yep. The Rangers, who knows where they end up? Maybe they improve before the trade deadline. It's not looking great for them right now. If they continue on this road, You're going to have some teams that were supposed to be really good, have a lot of good pieces that are probably going to be selling off at the trade deadline.
Grant, what do you got?
So the Blues win the Central Division, or the Cardinals win the NL Central, more likely to happen.
Cardinals win the NL Central.
Yeah.
I don't see how this team wins the Central Division.
Not this season, just next.
Oh, next season?
Yeah. The next team to do it.
Okay, the next team to win the Central Division. Oh, I'd still say the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals could potentially win it this year. Like, Kyle Tucker's great for the Cubs. I want to see what that final roster looks like. But, I mean, the NL Central is just bad. And I don't know if the Blues are winning their Central Division for at least 2 more years. Because I think you still have the supremacy of Winnipeg and Colorado. Minnesota's trending in the right direction. I do believe at some point Winnipeg's going to trail off. Colorado's going to tail off a little bit. So I think you're a couple years away. I think it's the Cardinals.
Yeah, I agree. When you look at the Central Division for the Blues, I agree that Colorado, Winnipeg probably still going to be there. Minnesota is going the right way. Who knows how much longer Dallas has got, but they still got some nice young pieces on that roster. It's not like they're aging out. So you can see where the Blues are probably 2 to 3, maybe even 4 years away from being in their window while also competing in this division to be at the top. We haven't gotten to it, but if I asked a question of, hey, who's the team, both not just this year, but in the long run, that will be the team that is kind of in their winning window in the NL Central, who is it? I don't know because it feels like everybody's kind of gotten stuck into the middle, or because of payroll restrictions, they're all stuck in the middle. So though I wouldn't bet on it, I can totally see what Alex said of the Cardinals winning the Central Division this year. So I would say it's the Cardinals.
A couple of these on the Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646 from the 618. Guys, more likely to happen, Binnington or Saad play in Game 1 of the regular season next year? This is easy. It's Binnington. Binnington is not getting traded. He will not be traded.
Tone.
Sorry. Guys, I don't think Binnington will be traded.
It's that chair.
That was still Tone.
It is this. I think it's this chair. I think it's this mic. It's probably the computer. It's this area over here. From the 636, more likely to happen. Where did this one just trail off to?
More likely to happen. Alex finds the text.
Where is it at? Here
or
it
we
goes.
go to break.
More likely to happen. The Pittsburgh Steelers clinch their division this weekend, or a non-contending team wins a game against a contending team.
Ugh, I got to look at this weekend.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Steelers are at Baltimore. That's
going to be a good game.
Especially after the Steelers just beat them. Yeah.
Hopefully you have Chris Boswell in your fantasy league this weekend.
another 15-12 final score.
I would say more likely Steelers clinch their division because you're at that point now in the year where, like, I'll use the Giants, for example. They're at the Falcons. I know the Falcons just changed their quarterback. Guys, the Falcons are favored by 8.5 points, according to Vegas. It wouldn't shock me if the Giants still got killed because a lot of these teams now are at that stage of the classic 1-2-3 Cancun. They're ready for the year to be over. I would be shocked if we see a major upset where you see someone that is like the Bears pulling off an upset and taking down the Detroit Lions. So I'll say more likely Steelers clinch their division.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean towards that as well. And again, still looking through here. I don't think the Jets are going to beat the Rams. Let's see. Giants are not going to beat the Falcons, even though I wouldn't say the Falcons are really a contending team. Honestly, there's not a ton of teams out there like Bears, Lions. Bears probably aren't going to beat the Lions. Although, I will say, the Bears can compete in games at times. It didn't happen in Minnesota this past weekend, but they did take Minnesota to overtime. And with all the injuries that Detroit has going into Chicago, that one could get interesting, but I don't see it. No, I think I'm going to stick with Pittsburgh winning the division.
Yeah, that's mine as well. I think Pittsburgh wins the division. There's so many scenarios that fall to where Pittsburgh wins it rather than one of these teams picking up a victory over the weekend against a contending squad. With Tanner Hendricks and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk to Chris Kerber, voice of the Blues, next on 101 ESPN.
You got to read some of these reviews that Classic Air Care is getting from the customers. How about this one? I was very pleased with Sean E.'s maintenance service of my AC. Sean was very personal and diligent in cleaning my unit inside and out while he was working. He noticed the shutoff water valve for the outside hose hookup he was using was dripping and simply tightened it up, which stopped the dripping. Such a nice surprise that he was so proactive. In my opinion, Sean is an exemplary service technician. Read that review, read them anymore. That's what you get at Classic Air Care. They came out to my house, they serviced the unit, they checked the air filter, they made sure that the temperature from where it leaves the unit to the vents has the right variance and everything is blowing well and the house is perfectly controlled. I don't know about you. I keep it at 71 in the summer. I keep it at 71 in the winter, and I don't like much variance to it. And Classic Air Care is helping make sure that my house is staying comfortable. They'll do the same for you. They've got a 24/7 hotline as well. They're here during the holidays for you. They know the stressful times that it can be. They want to make sure they alleviate it. If you have a problem with your furnace, if you have a problem with the heater, and you just want to get it maintained or something comes up, get a hold of them. Go online at classicaircare.com. You can call them and book an appointment as well. They'll take care of you and help de-stress your holiday season. Call them at Classic Air Care at 314-329-1943 or book online at classicaircare.com.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Blues go 500 on their short two-game homestand. They fell last night to the New Jersey Devils 4-1. Blues back to 500 on the season, 15-15 and 33 points, 3 points out of that final wild card spot in the Western Conference. Back in action tomorrow as they are in Tampa Bay to take on the Lightning in a back-to-back. They're on Friday as well in Florida against the Panthers. Both pregame starting at 5 o'clock here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario, BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN as we head to our Collier and Thompson phone line and welcome in the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber, who is with us every Wednesday here on 101 ESPN. Kerbs, appreciate the time as always. 4-1 loss to the Devils last night as the Blues back to 500. And we heard Jim Montgomery talk post-game a little bit about still working on some of the habits, the details, said that, didn't feel like they found a way to engage the home crowd fast enough into that game. Does this feel like it's still one of those bumps in the road in terms of developing the mindset of this group now with Jim Montgomery?
Well, whether we call it I don't know that it's a bump in the road. I think it's it's a next step in the progression. I thought you saw buy-in from Braden Shen and Jake Neighbors and the way they played last night. And, there's still going to be mistakes, and guys are going to try to make plays, and there's going to be hiccups and errors, and it's going to cost you some goals or odd man rushes here and there. But there was a pretty consistent buy-in, from that group there. I think with the next step for the St. Louis Blues and the players, Alex, has to be kind of almost more of a buy-in from everybody, and that is that they've got to have, I think, more consistent top six play of that style. They've got to have more consistent production. I don't think players can just rely on production alone. There's got to be more to it, and it's just going to take time, I think, for, as Ken Hitchcock told us when he was in town early, to trust the work. You're gonna have a couple of good games, and you're gonna go, okay, we can still make a play. And I look at that game last night, and it wasn't the same game that the Blues played in New Jersey. It wasn't the same game that the Blues played in a couple of other opponents as well. The amount of times the Blues turned the puck over inside the other team's blue line, or a pass would get knocked out of the air, knocked down. The entries on the power play where the team is they come over the blue line, they button up within 10 feet of the blue line and then turn it up. And it's easily sniffed out red and then chipped away by the other team. And I can tell you there are some guys in the group that are getting frustrated with it, other guys that just seem to continue to make those plays. And until that gets ironed out, you're going to have some of the inconsistencies that you're seeing. And I think you're seeing far more positives than negatives. And I know it gets frustrating for fans, Alex, but man, it's just a process that takes time.
And Kerbs, I want to talk about what is kind of their top line, or at least they didn't start that way last night, but they ended up going back to it, and Thomas Kyrou and Pavel Buchnevich. There's been a lot of conversation here in the past about, can that be a top line for the St. Louis Blues with Kyrou on there with Buch and Robert Thomas? We looked at some of their numbers so far this season when they've been on the ice together, and they're 26th in expected goals for. They're 22nd in expected goals allowed. Do you feel like this might be a top line for the St. Louis Blues for the long term, these three guys here?
Well, here's one thing. I don't do squat with expected goals. Until this one scenario, what happens, the expected goals before a game to me is not anything to gauge against. What expected goals afterwards are. In other words, coaches will break down games and they'll look at rushes, they'll look at plays, they'll look at how plays are developed, and then based on historical stuff, they say that type of play gets scored on 30% of the time, that kind of stuff. And then so it's. For me, Tanner, it's actually post-game expected goals and stuff like that and how that plays into it. The bigger question when it comes to that top line is this. It goes into exactly kind of what I was saying in the previous answer, right? They should be, but they're not as consistent as you need them to be. Right? Sometimes the separation gets too much. The predictability in their game isn't there. You see them go from one to the next, and that's why sometimes you see Jake Neighbors put up there. Jake Neighbors' style of game adds more predictability to that line, okay? But Jake maybe doesn't have some of the higher-end skill yet that you're seeing, say, from a Jordan Kyrou, right? You can't always just come across the blue line, try to cut across to the middle with it and have it get poked away. You can't try a rink-wide pass that gets knocked down. And to me, when I know that there's really buy-in from this team, I'm not worried about the bottom six. I'm not worried at all about the bottom six. They play a certain style, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to have to be that consistent style from the top line, to be honest with you. And then when it does, when the opportunities are there, then you let the skill shine. When it's not there, and so some of it is just decision-making, Tanner, the way I see it. And I also think you see enough of a drop-off. I mean, look, you got to applaud what Alexei Toropchenko's doing. He's bringing a style of play that Jim Montgomery wants to see, but you're trying to compete, right, with the 5th overall team in the National Hockey League last night with Alexei Toropchenko on your second line. That's not how this team was designed. But that's what Jim Montgomery is trying to figure out and trying to use methods to get guys into the battle there. So I think there is more of a drop-off in terms of the skill between the top line for the Blues and the other lines. And there's some consistency factors as a result of that. So when you start to see that top line going, and you have seen it under Jim Montgomery, play the right way when nothing's there, get it in deep, go to work, and you start to see zone battles won, then you know you're going to be cooking with a little bit of gas.
We got a couple more minutes with the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber, who's with us on BK and Ferrario on the Callier and Thompson phone line. Kerbs, on the power play, you mentioned consistency, and on the Curbside podcast, you and Joe on the breakdown last night were discussing the power play, the inability to tie the game up. I've been keeping track of that, 2 for 20 this season with an opportunity to tie the game on the power play. And we talked a little bit ago of, do you consider switching up these units a little and moving personnel back and forth? Where do you fall on this power play and the struggles that are taking place?
Well, I think the first thing you think of, okay, can the personnel be different, that kind of stuff. I just think you had to look at big picture over the last 2 years. Look at the success that it started to have last season. You know, in the second half of the year, it was much better. I guess the biggest issue for me, without getting too deep into you know, some of the real X's and O's of it, is I just don't see a shooting mentality. I look at the goals that are scored and look at the slap shots that go in, and one-timers have to be there. The Blues haven't had a regular quarterback, at least from along the blue line, whether it be Robert Thomas, Justin Falk, Scott Perunovich, Colton Parayko, Nick Leddy, whomever it may be, right? It hasn't been there, you know, pretty much all season long. They clearly are missing Torrey Krug when it comes to that aspect of their game. His ability, his decision-making, moving the puck quicker, things along those kind of lines. It's the process isn't happening fast enough, and I think teams are able to sniff it out. So, you know, Alex, whether it's a personnel change or it's just literally, and again, the buy-in of a mindset of, you know, rip the shot when you got it and then battle. I mean, there's a reason Jake Neighbors with 4 power play goals is leading the team in power play goals. Look at where he scores them, right? I mean, they don't have the threat from the outside. Teams know it. And unless they start shooting and bombing it from there, teams don't have to really worry about it. So they can key in on other guys. It's going to be a challenge. But the thing is, Alex, when you're not scoring quite as much 5-on-5 as you want to, the power play can mask that, but it also has to be a big help to it. Teams struggle offensively when the 5-on-5 isn't there, and then your power play struggles. So it's a little bit of everything, but I think almost like we've talked about with the first 2 topics already, it's just got to be a mindset of how you're going to attack. So sometimes guys, and by the way, I don't look at last night's game. Now, obviously, a coach and a player could look at it very differently, right? And I understand that. And realistically, as a fan, I don't look at last night's result as that bad of a result. You're playing a team that kind of where they're at and things are going is better than you. Yeah, they beat them a couple weeks ago, 3-0. But they got a couple of breakdowns, took advantage of it, and then held on for the rest of the game. You know, but to me, it's how do you come out of it? What do you do? Because if you are going to climb into the race, whether it be against New Jersey or whether it be against Tampa or Florida, you're going to have to beat some of those teams, and they have been doing that of late, and that's a positive.
Well, they got those two more tough teams coming up on this road trip, Tampa Bay, Florida, and then they take on Detroit, then a couple more home games before the Winter Classic on New Year's Eve, and then the month of January opens up with the schedule lightening up a little bit compared to what these last couple of months have been. Curbs, always appreciate the time, my man. It'll be the last time we talk to you until after the holidays and the Christmas, so Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and the family, and we'll talk to you once we get closer to the Winter Classic.
All right, sounds good, guys. Merry Christmas. You guys do a great job. Keep it up, and then have yourself a good little break.
Awesome. You too, Curbs. Voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber with us here on 101 ESPN. He and Joe Vitale will have the broadcast tomorrow night against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then Friday against the Panthers, and then on Monday against the Detroit Red Wings. Every single day runs together right now for this Blues hockey schedule.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You really feeling it?
I don't know what day it is right now, but we'll get there at some point. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll take a break. We'll rewind it next on 101 ESPN. Hey, Blues fans, enter the Verizon NHL Winter Classic Sweepstakes. Verizon Discover Winter Classic Sweepstakes, your chance to see the Blues take on the Blackhawks New Year's Eve in the Discover NHL Winter Classic game in Chicago. One winner is going to receive 4 tickets to the game plus a $3,000 gift card. You can visit select St. Louis area Verizon locations, or you can go to 101ESPN.com. But you have to enter by today. Today is the final day for you to do this. No purchase necessary to enter. Must be a legal U.S. resident of Missouri or Illinois, age 18 years or older to enter. Get full details now at 101ESPN.com. As we rewind it with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. If you missed anything from our show today, you can check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, or you can check it out on the 101 ESPN app, all presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. And we'll rewind it with the loss to the Devils last night. T-Bone Curbs just mentioned it. It is a game that you lay an egg. It's a game that the offense still does not give you a lot of excitement. But as Curbs mentioned, you do kind of have to take a step back from game to game and kind of look at it from a Doug Armstrong point of view. That's a team that's expected to win the Stanley Cup versus a team that's trying to get into the playoffs. And it did last night, specifically in the third period, feel a lot like this team is just in a holding pattern until some of their next level players are ready to get to the NHL level.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you mentioned it. When you have Sundqvist and Saad as kind of the two guys, and Saad was just recently a healthy scratch.
Yeah.
Could potentially be that in their next game if Fox is back. If you got those guys as kind of that second wave when everybody is gassed after being on the ice for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes on a 6-on-5, shows you where you're at right now as an organization offensively. And it's one of those where I don't think you're going to see them improve offensively enough this season at 5-on-5. I could see where they end up being a little better than where they are today. I could totally see that. But it's become clear that the path for the Blues to be winning hockey games or getting themselves in the playoffs this year will be kind of what the formula was a little bit last year, which is, hey, our goaltending's going to have to be excellent, which I thought Benner was solid last night. The first goal, probably would want that one back. Outside of that, though, that's the only one. And then you look at them defensively, they're going to have to be a just solid defensive team, or a really good defensive team, I should say.
Yeah.
And they look pretty good since they acquired Cam Fowler. So that it's clear that's what their path is. I don't think there is much more of a ceiling to this offense. I think this is kind of what it is. You're going to have to find ways to win hockey games. That's probably going to be the old school defensive mindset.
Yeah, well, and you got to gain points right now. Like, that's this team's biggest issue, staying competitive in this race. You're only 3 points out of a wild card spot, but as other teams continue to win, you need to find ways to string wins together. And the Blues got to set a back-to-back starting tomorrow. Then they play on Monday against the Detroit Red Wings. Then a little time off, Nashville, Buffalo, Winter Classic, and then they get into 2025 where the schedule lightens up a little bit from there. And again, tomorrow night against the Tampa Bay Lightning, first community pregame at 5, puck drop at 6. Tanner and I will be back with you tomorrow. Huge shout out to Graham Francis filling in for us today. Bradford will be in with us tomorrow. The Fast Lane coming up next from 2 to 6 on 101 ESPN.